My name is Nathan. I'm a 40-year-old businessman who runs an import-export company. I lived with mom and dad and my brother Sam. Some siblings coexist peacefully. Some fight all the time. And some hate each other. Sam and I ended up in this latter category because our decisions shape our lives. Let me tell you our story. I worked hard and made good decisions to be successful in life. This contrasted with my lazy brother who wanted easy money without having to work for it. This was a sore point between us. We fought all the time, and the situation was exacerbated by Dad's unexpected death by heart attack. Sam and I took over Dad's business and became partners. Soon, though, Sam thought the business was too much work, so he decided to work abroad for bigger wages and less work, presumably. I begged him to work locally and stay close to the family, but he couldn't be persuaded. So he gave up his share in the business and left to work abroad, and I ran the business as sole proprietor. As I gained experience and business acumen, the business prospered and grew as I earned the customer's trust. As my profits grew, Mom and I moved into a bigger house. Mom wanted me to get married and have kids, and I wanted to make her wish come true. So I found a beautiful girl and married her. She was a blessing to us. When she became pregnant, Mom was ecstatic. We learned that it would be a baby boy, so we chose a name for him, John. As her pregnancy progressed from trimester to trimester, the strain on her body was obvious, but finally, the baby was born, and Mom and I were thrilled to see her only grandchild and my only child, respectively, growing up day by day. I wanted to teach him everything, and I wanted him to be brave. Our lives were content, peaceful, and fulfilled. At one point, I decided to grow the company by opening up some more stores. It was a challenging project, but was necessary to remain competitive with our rivals. Our wealth and good fortune continued to grow, and I bought a new villa for us. Mom, wife, and son. One evening shortly after that, we invited friends over to celebrate moving into our new villa. As we were celebrating, friends were wishing us the best. John was playing and running around everywhere and being a little naughty at times, and everything was going smoothly. Then suddenly, the lights went out for a couple of minutes, and then came back on. This was unusual, but not wanting to worry the guests, I told them that it was a normal glitch that happened once in a while. Still, as a precaution, I called for all the children to gather around me. All were present, except for John. We searched everywhere for him, but couldn't find him. We were all worried about what had happened to him. Then, one of my friends shouted that there was a phone call for me. When I took the phone, a voice on the other end said, "Don't worry about your little prince. He's okay, and he'll stay that way as long as you send us $100,000. Otherwise..." Then the caller hung up. My friends tried to calm me down, but I was frantic with worry. Who would want to kidnap my son? If I gave them the money, what assurance did I have that they would return my son? Then I got angry. They needed to be punished for this heinous deed. So I called a friend who was a police officer and asked him for help. He said he could put a small tracking device in the money bag so they could track my movements and hopefully catch these kidnapped for ransom thugs. While it was a neat plan, it was also extremely dangerous if the kidnappers were to find out and escape from our trap. After a couple of days, the thugs called and told me where to meet them with the money. It was a location in the northern part of the country, a forest with dense trees and tall grass, a place that would be easy to escape into and hide. So I got the money, put it in the car, and drove to the agreed-upon meeting place. When I reached the location, a car was there waiting. I parked close to it and exited the car with the money bag in hand. The driver of the other car stepped out. It was Sam. "Sam? I thought you were working abroad," I said. "I was, but the work was too hard, so I quit and came back," Sam replied. "How can you kidnap and ransom your own nephew?" I asked. Sam laughed and said, "You misunderstand. I've just returned to take my share of the money." "What money are you talking about?" I asked. Sam sneered. "The money you took from me in running Dad's business." I tried to connect the dots. I said, "Sam, you were half owner of the business, but then you gave up your ownership to go work abroad. You haven't done anything to earn any money from the business." Sam kept sneering. I want my share of the profits. Shut up, give me the money, and you'll get your son back." I gave him the money, he released John, and John ran into my arms crying. I asked John if Sam had hurt him, but he said no. After Sam took possession of the money, the police revealed themselves and moved in to surround us. Using a megaphone, they commanded him to surrender, but he ran into the woods instead. The policemen closed in and pursued him, but they lost him in the woods. He had escaped. I returned home with John, and my wife hugged him and cried tears of joy that he had been returned safe and unharmed. Mom asked me who did this. I hesitated. Should I tell her the truth? I decided to do so. She was horrified. A few days later, I received a letter. It was from Sam asking if I was ready for the next payment of my debt to him. I was dismayed and fearful at the same time. Sam had decided to be a villain against his own family, and I had decided to fight back against him tooth and nail. Decisions shape our lives.
I adore my family. I adore our get-togethers, our joking around, our meals, everything. I can't imagine my life without them. But one day, I almost killed them all. No, I'm not insane, I assure you, so don't worry. I'll tell you what happened. My name is Ginger. I'm 18 years old. As you can see, I'm wearing an apron. This is because I love to cook. I like all things kitchen-related. My happiest moments are when I see my family eating a meal together. I always cook for them. They enjoy it too, and they support me. They let me try different dishes from different countries. I like to listen to their opinions about my cooking skills. I'm also addicted to cooking programs. One day, my cousin Charlotte came to visit, before Thanksgiving Day. She likes to dress all in black, and today was no exception. For some reason, she had called me earlier and asked me if I had ever heard of Thanksgiving's Day curse. I said no, of course. So she told me that the curse applied to large families who ate a big meal together on Thanksgiving. The curse was the result of an evil spirit named Vicky, who would possess the cook's body in some family's household and poison the whole family. She said that Vicky used to be a housewife who was a great cook and who loved her family, and yet she poisoned them all during Thanksgiving meal. She watched them die one by one, and then she killed herself as the grand finale. At first, I thought Charlotte was joking and trying to scare me, and I told her that it was nonsense, just an old wives' tale. But she said that every legend was usually based on facts. I paused for a second. That was partly true. I went to my room and searched the internet and found the same information about the curse that she had relayed to me, which frightened me even more. Vicky was just like me, or was it the opposite? I stopped myself from getting deeper into this. I needed to focus on preparing the meal. On Thanksgiving's Day, my father bought some groceries, which included a white bottle of liquid. I presumed it to be milk, though it smelled a little weird, but I thought it was my imagination. My aunt called and said she would be arriving a few minutes later, so I had to hurry and finish the meal quickly. My finishing touch was dessert. It was going to be pumpkin candy. I prepared it using the milk that Dad bought. After everyone had arrived, I served dinner. We all sat down and prayed before the meal. Then, everyone started eating. Things were going well. Everyone was chatting merrily and complimenting me on the food. I was overjoyed, but somehow I couldn't shake this feeling that something was wrong. I looked at Charlotte, but she smiled supportively. Suddenly, one by one, the people around the table started clutching their stomachs and groaning in pain. The last thing I remember before I lost consciousness was my brother calling the ambulance. When I woke up later, I was lying in a hospital bed, alongside all my family members, who were also lying in the hospital bed. The doctor came in and reported happily that we would all be fine. Then he looked at me and winked. He also said, "Next time, young lady, I suggest not using white paint in your cooking." And that was how I almost killed my loving family. In legends and horror stories, ghosts are typically spirits of the dead, those who suffered greatly in their lives, that when their time comes, they choose to linger in this world, to sow hatred and chaos among the living. Do you believe this, that there are vengeful spirits living among us, right here, right now? I do, and my story will tell you why. I'm Martha. I'm 19 years old, and I have a twin sister, Caroline. She wasn't just my sister, but we were best friends and subsequent partners in crime. We suffered a miserable life because we lived in poverty. Our parents were very poor, despite belonging to a rich family. Grandpa, on my dad's side of the family, worked in the petroleum industry, where he made lots of investments and projects. And fortunately, he had a lot of enemies too, many of whom were from Mom's side of the family. Dad was the middle son, but he assumed responsibility for Grandpa's work because he was very competent and capable. Similarly, Mom became responsible for her father's work. She did her best to avoid conflict between her side of the family and Dad's side, so that they could work together peacefully. It was at this point, I believe, that vengeful spirits must have come into play. My parents had loved each other since their childhood, but they didn't tell their families about it. In the past, both my grandpas were once friends and partners. They worked together within the same company, but they later became enemies and split the company into two. Both families hated each other that day forth. All of them, except for my parents. Mom's uncles took over her company and fired her. Dad couldn't bear to see Mom in this situation, so he told his dad that he was going to marry her. So his father made him choose between my mother and the company with all the power and wealth that came with it. To Grandpa's chagrin, Dad chose Mom over everything else. And so, they got married and lived together with Grandma. They faced life's problems without any support from anyone. Grandpa felt betrayed by Dad and disowned him. Then, Carolyn and I were born. Dad did his best to make us happy and give us everything we needed. Grandma told us about our family's history and how both our parents had been cut off from their families out of sheer greed and betrayal. It felt a bit unfair, but this was our life now. Then, one day, we heard Dad speaking on the phone, with Mom standing beside him, and they were both acting very nervous. He told her to take care of us, and then he left the house and never came back. Mom never told us where he went or why he left. Sometime after that, Grandma passed away. Our situation was getting worse. We thought we had to do something to help Mom. Maybe we were being influenced by those vengeful spirits I mentioned. But either way, Carolyn and I made our decision to go over to the dark side. We decided to steal, rob, defraud. We were smart enough. Together, we could definitely pull it off. We began with our neighbor, very wealthy, but very cheap. We figured she must be keeping her money somewhere in the house, since she didn't believe in leaving a dime in the bank's care and was completely convinced that they would steal her money. Lucky for us, I guess. And we were right. We infiltrated her house when she was away and found a load of money stashed away under a loose tile on the floor. Took some time to find, but we got it. When we got home, the house was completely deserted. Mom wasn't there. Her clothes were all gone from the wardrobe. We were on our own now. We began exploiting jewelry shop owners. We would pretend to be a wealthy customer and tell the owner that we wanted to take the jewelry home to show our mom and get her opinion. We would drug hotel owners and put all the money in their safe into a bag, then scream and call for help, saying that the owner had just collapsed, creating a diversion and disappearing in the crowd. We were getting quite good at it. Our wealth slowly grew day by day. Mom called, every now and then, to check that we were fine on our own. Of course, she knew nothing about our work, or what we were doing to survive. Our ultimate goal was to earn a lot of money and run away to another country to start a new life. One evening, I was with my friends, and I met a guy named Craig. He was rich, but somehow seemed different than all the people we robbed. Later I found out, to my surprise, that he was our cousin, the grandson of the man that had taken everything away from my mother and fired her. Unsure of what to do, I told Carolyn what I knew. She went ecstatic. She told me that this was our chance to take back everything, the company, the money that belonged to us. But for the first time, we didn't quite agree. Craig was nothing like his father. He wasn't greedy. He was kind and gentle. He often told me that money was a curse if it meant living alone away from people that we care about and cherish. I made up my mind, and I told Carolyn that I couldn't be a part of our evil scheming anymore, and I wanted out. And so I left her and went to live on my own. At this point, I had no idea what Carolyn was up to. In the meantime, Craig was negotiating a deal that would earn his company a lot of profit. He told me to come visit at the company, and then we would go out for dinner. I accepted happily. When I arrived at his company, I sensed someone behind me. Then, Suddenly a hand pressed a handkerchief over my mouth, and I passed out. When I woke up, I found Craig unconscious beside me. To the side, I could see his safe was wide open. Papers were scattered everywhere, and in my hand was the key to the safe. Then the police arrived, found the safe key in my hand, and accused me of being a thief. I told them that I had been drugged unconscious, just like Craig. The police officer looked inside my bag and found a bottle of chloroform. I was shocked, to say the least. I couldn't understand what had happened. They took me downstairs and tried to wake up Craig. At about that time, a woman in a black wig came over to me and said, "Martha, you betrayed me." It was Carolyn. I couldn't believe that she framed me. Then she left. Her betrayal hurt me deeply. A part of my brain told me that I had betrayed her first, but that doesn't matter now. When I get out of prison, someday, I resolved to get my revenge on her. We were no longer sisters. Just as we had been betrayed by our families before us, we were now locked into yet another circle of family betrayal. Only it was more personal and closer to home this time. Were they truly vengeful spirits influencing us? I think so. What about you?
There are all kinds of mistakes. Some are forgiven, some are forgotten. Some are borne by others, and some you pay for all the days of your life. These mistakes dog you relentless, even in your dreams. I've made mistakes in my lifetime, and I paid dearly for them. My name is Patricia. I am 19 years old, and I don't think I'm arrogant. I do think that I'm the most beautiful girl in my neighborhood. I live with my parents and twin brothers. Many boys in the neighborhood want to date me. My mom always encouraged me to think independently and to ignore other people's opinions. She told me to do whatever I wanted. Father was quite the opposite. He was always admonishing me to watch my behavior and behave myself. But I preferred my mother's advice, to be free and act on my own. My friends were like me. We were carefree and impulsive. We made bets about boys and love. We would flirt with boys and choose our victims and then cheat on them at the end to turn the tables on them. Playing frivolously with people's feelings was a bad thing, but I enjoyed it in a cruel sort of way. It thrilled and empowered me. But things changed when a guy named Jack saved my life one day. I was walking down the street alone while listening to music when a speeding car almost ran me down because I wasn't paying attention to where I was walking. Jack appeared from nowhere and pulled me out of harm's way and rescued me. He asked me if I was okay, and I said I was. He offered to drive me home, and I accepted. We didn't say a word during the drive. When we arrived home, I wrote my phone number on a piece of paper, along with a note telling him to call me in 2 hours. He did, and we talked until daylight. Jack was handsome, with brown eyes and well-tanned skin. He was a courageous man who protected me and helped me achieve all my dreams while we were together. If anyone annoyed me, I would go to him and he would embrace me in his arms to calm me. I felt safe whenever I was with him. We got engaged, had a small wedding with families and friends, and began enjoying our new life together. But my friends grew jealous of my newfound happiness, and they didn't like Jack. They thought that I deserved a better man. In the beginning, I tried to ignore their sniping at Jack, but I ended up being negatively biased towards Jack and began unintentionally sabotaging our relationship. I accused him of blocking me from achieving my dreams and of not caring about me. He promised me that after his graduation, he would find a job. I didn't believe him and asked to break off our engagement. He begged me not to and cried. But I had made my decision. I was torn between his love and my friend's jealousy and envy. I ended up losing him. Then I met Mark, a funny, blonde, rich guy with a nice car. Many girls wanted to marry him, but I pursued him and beat them all. I sensed that he didn't seem to care as deeply for me as Jack had, and that he didn't care about my safety as much either, but I dismissed my intuition. After all, he bought me anything I desired. So we decided to marry. Still, a little voice in my head kept whispering to me that I was making a big mistake by marrying Mark. After our marriage, We lived in a big villa with a swimming pool and lots of servants. But Mark changed after a while. He became irrational and paranoid. He began controlling everything in my life, even my lifestyle and my behavior. He raged a lot. Finally, I told him that I was fed up with his behavior and that I didn't like being controlled by him like a dog on a leash. He sneered that he owned me because he gave me all his money to spend. I stopped making love to him, so he began raping me when the mood struck him. This made me miss Jack and his deep love for me. I cried a lot during our now miserable relationship. I was so distraught that I went to see a doctor with one of my friends. After checking me over, the doctor told me that I was pregnant. I was torn between joy and sadness. When I told Mark about my pregnancy and situation, he told me that we were still young and that I should abort the baby. And he threatened me, said if I didn't get an abortion, then he would do it himself. I furtively collected all my things one night and ran away to another state. I didn't know how to start over. I stayed in a motel for a while and worked in a restaurant as a waitress. I agonized a lot during my pregnancy about whether to have the baby or not. I had a kind colleague named Veronica, and I told her my story. She sympathized with me and asked me to come live with her. One day, I had a strong stomach pain in my 7th month of pregnancy, and she took me to the hospital. I was surprised to find that the birthing assistant was none other than Jack himself. We looked at each other silently for a moment. Then he asked me about my life, and I cried and asked him to help me. I saw the love in his eyes, and he told me that he would do his best to help me and the baby. Before the surgery, I held his arm and asked him to forgive me. He shushed me to be silent and confessed that he still loved me. I cried like a baby. He hugged me and made me feel warm and safe. His loving smile was the last thing I remembered before going under the anesthesia. I woke up in a room full of flowers with my Veronica smiling beside me. Jack knocked on the door and entered with a nurse in tow behind him. She was holding my baby, and they congratulated me for having a beautiful little girl. After that, he visited me every day at the hospital. I told him everything about my miserable life. He offered to let me live with him and promised to take care of me and the baby. I felt that my life was finally on the right track, and that life would forgive all my many mistakes. I even forgot my miserable past. But unfortunately, cruel life was finished with me yet. One day, I received a letter from Mark threatening me, saying that I would pay for running away from him. I immediately told Jack, and he reassured me and told me not to be afraid, that he would protect me with his life. Soon afterwards, my fears came true when the doorbell rang, and Jack opened the door to find Mark pointing a gun at him. Mark said coldly, "Do you imagine that you could take Patricia away from me? You can't." And then he laughed and pointed the gun toward me. I screamed and closed my eyes. When I opened my eyes again, I saw Jack standing in front of me, with blood gushing from his chest. He had told me that he would protect me with his life, and he did. I rushed over to Mark. We struggled. The gun went off, and Mark fell to the floor, dead. I'm sitting in my prison cell. I had lost everything. My life, my love, and ultimately my daughter. Life had exacted a high payment from me for making too many mistakes in my life.
My name is Laura, and as a child, I craved unconditional love. But instead of cuddles and family outings, my lasting memories are of bitter rows. My mom never wanted children, she says. She told me that the only reason she didn't get an abortion was that she found about the pregnancy too late. My dad left when I was very young, which made my mother resentful. She had to stay and be the responsible mom, which she hated. On one occasion, my grandparents took me away, and I remember thinking, this is what family should be like. The relationship dissolved completely when I was a teenager. My mom's first love was always men, and when I was 15, she moved to Africa for a boyfriend without telling me. It's something I found impossible to forgive, especially as there has never been an explanation or even an apology. She has contacted me since, but always asking for money.
That's why I made the decision to cut all ties with her. I put my mother's behavior down to a horrible upbringing, but she can't make the same excuses for her father. Dad had a lovely childhood, but he has no emotions or empathy for anyone. We haven't spoken in 7 years. Although she's so close to his parents and they encouraged her and her dad to repair the damaged relationship, it brought her nothing but more hurt. After he left my mom, he went on to have a new family. That was really hard for me to handle when he's made so little effort with me. My issues with my mom and dad have badly affected my mental health all throughout my life. I see a therapist regularly now to try to help me deal with the emotions. When I get married next year, neither of my parents will be invited. I grew up thinking I did something wrong for my parents not to want me. My only regret is not telling my dad how much I hated him. I don't hate my mom. I just feel sorry for her and I wish you could see what she's done. Ending all contact with a parent may sound extreme, but for me, it was an act of self-preservation. My dad left when I was 8, and I haven't spoken to my mom once since I moved to Germany 10 years ago. She wasn't maternal and had a really bad temper, which she took out on me. She would never be affectionate, and I felt unloved. I believe my mother may have had a miserable childhood, which meant she lacked the emotional tools to be a good parent. After I grew up and had my own daughter, our relationship got even worse. My mother never came to see me or her granddaughter, but she did form a close bond with her son's new family. It hurt me that she made an effort to spend time with my brother's children and not mine. Over time, I have come to terms with the fact that she never loved me. I don't hate her or feel sorry for her. I just don't want her in my life anymore. Andy hasn't spoken to mom for 25 years, after they stopped communicating in his early 20s. For him, the problem was a lack of respect and common values. I grew up in a children should be seen and not heard household, where my parents' opinion was the only right one. We would have dinner in silence, and my parents never encouraged me in my interests or activities. He says he was never praised for his achievements, only criticized for doing wrong things. Whatever I did, it was never good enough. If I did well at something, my dad would always have to prove he was better. The house rules were strict, and he was sent to bed by 10 p.m. every night, even at the age of 16. But instead of sleeping, Andy found himself listening to the radio to escape the boredom. He quickly became interested in current affairs and politics, which gave him a new insight into the world. It made me realize that my parents' views were snobby, sexist, and racist. I was never allowed to voice any opinion that contradicted their views or I'd be sent to my room. It made me lose respect for them. Andy and I were living in the same house, but we hadn't had a conversation for over a year. I can't say I regretted not making up with him. He was miserable to be around. Several years later, Andy graduated from university and bought a house. I was so proud, but my mom told me it was horrible. She said it looked like a council house and asked why he wanted to live in a slum. As his career advanced, she became more critical and constantly compared him with his half-brother. I was 21 and felt successful, but she was ashamed of everything I did because it didn't fit her snobbish ideals. Eventually, he stopped contacting both my mother and his brother, and has never looked back. It wasn't really a difficult decision to make because we had nothing in common and they didn't accept me or my life choices. Andy understands why some people see this as a surprising decision, but has no interest in sustaining a relationship for the sake of it. I feel like seeing your parents out of duty is wrong. If you have made no effort to build a relationship with your children, I don't think you can expect them to be there. For other families, the rift is a result of the parents' divorce. Like my friend Helen, she lost contact with 2 of her 4 adult children this year, after ending an emotionally abusive relationship with their father. Since they separated in 2011, it's been a slow process of parental alienation. Her son hasn't spoken to her since last year, and her middle daughter is now ghosting her on every channel of communication. She believes her former partner has used the same manipulation tactics on her children as those that destroyed their marriage. Once the kids got older and she developed her own life and interests, her ex became controlling and tried to stop her from doing the things that she liked. During a period of gaslighting that spanned many years, she says he told lies about her behavior to friends and family. Once he told them she was drunk and suicidal and she had gone missing. In reality, she had gone to the supermarket. When she joined a local band, he told everyone she was crazy and that she wanted to run away and become famous. Over time, her husband's side of the story was believed, and Helen began feeling alienated from her family. She sadly lost her mom a few years ago, and her dad is a man's man and took her ex's side. The divorce impacted the children big time and damaged them emotionally. Despite making every effort to build bridges with her children, she admits she doesn't know what their father has told them. He has always made an argument before parties and celebrations to prevent her from coming to the event. He also accused her of having an affair, even though she never cheated on him. The relationships with her two estranged children became so strained that she wasn't given a chance to discuss what had happened. The only explanation they've ever given her is that she doesn't care about them or that she treats them as little kids. Though losing contact has been an extremely painful experience for both of us, I don't blame anyone. Not me, not my mom, not Helen, and not her children. It's no one's fault. I can very much relate to how Helen's children felt. They're like goldfish swimming in a tank where someone keeps adding a tiny bit of color every day until they start to see things in a completely different way. I would love a chance to reconnect with my mom, but I can't see how it will happen. At the moment, I feel like I'm standing outside and they're inside a glass room. I really miss my mom, my brother, and definitely my dad.
Friendship is not a word that is easily described. In fact, those who know the true meaning of it are scarce. It usually comes with a bond of trust that is not easily broken. The question is, can you believe in that bond till the very end, no matter what? My name is Sophie. I'm 21 years old. I used to live with my parents and my two siblings, Lena and Brian. Dad's an architect. Mom's a doctor. But she had to leave her job to take care of Brian and Lena because they were young and still needed her care and attention. And for a long time, so did I. As a kid, my parents were always worried about me. I didn't have any friends at school, and I was very shy. I would immediately cry when something happened, but all that changed when I met my guardian angel, Matilda. The way we met was somewhat bizarre. I did pretty well in my studies at school. I had hobbies like art and music. Unfortunately, there was this one group of girls who liked to bully people like me. One day, in science class, I was carrying a project I was working on when those girls stopped me and tried to take my project. Just when I was about to cry and let them steal it from me, a girl appeared and told them to leave me alone, or else they would have to deal with her. When they saw her, they looked frightened and left in a hurry. I didn't know the girl, but when I turned to look at her, I saw that she was a tall brunette with a beautiful smile. She took my project and held it for me because I was shaking and sobbing. Then she walked me to class and told me she would be back during break to check on me. As she was leaving, she called back to me and shouted that her name was Matilda and said that she would see me later. She did indeed come back during break. The clique of bully girls left me alone after that and kept their distance from Matilda as well. I asked Matilda why they were so afraid of her. She laughed and said it was a long story, but the short version was that she beat them up once, and they became afraid of her and stayed clear ever since. I asked her how she knew that those girls were always bothering me. She said it was pure coincidence, that she had happened to be in the classroom the day they tried to take my project from me. She said that I looked so helpless that she decided to step in. I asked her to be my friend. She teared up a little and said, "Of course," and from that day forward, we became the best of friends. I was cheerful every day now, and we grew closer and closer together. The happiest days of my life. Her story was unusual. Her dad was a boxer. Her parents split up because her mom couldn't stand the thought of him risking his life boxing every day, so she left. Her dad did his best to look after Maddie and her two little sisters. Then, one day, he was killed by thieves who robbed him as he was coming home from work, leaving Maddie to raise her siblings alone. This heavy responsibility matured her and toughened her character. She taught me to be bold, to love adventures. I feared nothing with her there. I dealt with situations decisively, without hesitation. We were like two separate halves of a ship sailing in the dark that happened to find each other one night and came together to complete each other. This was how I met Maddie, and our friendship grew stronger year after year. Maddie and her sisters were like my own sisters. We were all one big happy family, until something happened that disturbed the fabric of our universe. I enrolled in the College of Engineering, while she enrolled in a different college. The first year of college was difficult for me because I missed Maddie so much, but then I tried really hard and focused on my studies. In my third year, I met Matthew, a player on the college basketball team. During that time, I was working for the college newspaper, and I was assigned to interview him. He was smart, handsome, and had an inspiring story. His parents died when he was young, leaving him responsible for his younger brother, so he decided to work and earn money while pursuing his dream of being a basketball player. By the time we met, he had a chance to play in the NBA. We had a connection, and he proposed to me. I wanted to tell Maddie so badly, to share this wonderful news with her, but I couldn't. Maddie had completely disappeared that year, and I hadn't seen her at all. I didn't know where she was or how to reach her. Then, one day, I got a call from her. Her voice sounded distressed, maybe because her responsibilities were such a burden on her. Either way, I was glad she called. She seemed sad, and I asked her what I could do to help. I told her that I wanted to see her, so we could catch up. She agreed, and told me that we needed to get together soon. When we finally met, I saw that she had lost a lot of weight. I asked her why, and she replied that she was working while going to college. She wasn't looking after herself at all, but her eyes told another story. I told her about Matthew, and that we were getting married soon. She smiled, but her joy seemed affected somehow. I didn't know how to describe it. Perhaps it was the disconnected look in her eyes. I wanted to introduce her to Matthew, but apparently they had already met. They spoke politely to each other, but there seemed to be something between them that made us all feel uncomfortable. I didn't know what it was. A while later, Matthew was always nervous about something. He always seemed to be busy with training or games. But was that all there was? At the same time, Maddie had started acting weird as well. Something was going on between them, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Whenever her phone rang, Maddie wouldn't answer, or even look to see who was calling. Shortly before my wedding, Maddie had disappeared again without notice. Matthew went back to his normal self, and everything seemed to be fine. The wedding ceremony was going beautifully, until we got to the part where the preacher said, "Anyone who saw a reason why this marriage should not take place, may they speak now or forever hold their peace." Well, it turned out that there was someone who saw a reason why this marriage should not take place, and that someone did speak up. And much to my amazement, it was Maddie. She shouted that Matthew was her fiancé, and that he had deceived her and left her for me. Matthew looked at her with a perplexed look on his face, as if this was news to him. I felt like time had shifted into slow motion. I had to be dreaming. I couldn't imagine why neither of them told me this before. I looked at Maddie and asked if it was true. She said, "I'm done lying to you. I don't want to act anymore. Meeting you has been the most horrible thing that has ever happened to me. My life was going well till I met you. You got everything you wanted, even Matthew. He chose you instead." I was staring, lost for words. Tears started running down my face. "Please leave," I said quietly. Maddie was crying too, yet she smiled and walked away. I didn't understand her behavior. Why did she smile as she walked out of my life? Days later, the answer revealed itself. Matthew and I knew each other well, and what happened at the wedding did not affect us at all. Still, I could see it in Matthew's eyes. He had something to tell me, and one day, he came inside the house with tears in his eyes. I asked what was wrong. if his family was okay. He nodded and said, "They're all fine, Sophie, but there's something I've been wanting to tell you. During those times, when Maddie disappeared without warning, it was because she kept a secret from you. She had a terminal disease. She was dying. I was shocked." He continued and said that she had arranged the scene at the wedding to make me hate her, so that when she died, I wouldn't feel grief or sorrow, that she had loved me so much. Soon after our wedding day, her disease took a turn for the worst, and she died. I was still standing in shock. He gave me the letter she wrote me. "Dear Sophie, I'm sure that up to this point in time, you didn't understand my strange behavior, my sudden change. It was necessary to protect you from the shock of my death. I had no choice but to make you hate me. Don't be upset with me, dear Sophie. These are the last moments in my life, and I just wanted to tell you that I love you. Forever friends, Matilda." I cried like I never did before. I had lost my best friend. Dear Maddie, now I know the reason for your tearful smile when you left the wedding that day. You are still my one true friend. Not a moment has passed without thinking of you. Forgive me for not being there when you needed me most. You will always be in my heart. Hi, my name is Sandra, and I'm 17 years old. People used to call me Evil Eyes, not because I had a strange face, but because of my eyes. I had a genetic mutation, so my eyes were different colors. One was light gray and the other was dark brown. This effect made me look like an evil witch, a point of morbid curiosity. Whenever I would enter a public area, people would follow me with their eyes. Whenever children would see me, they would begin crying in fear. I had very few friends because people mocked whoever hung around with a freak like me. Society's negative reaction to my condition forced me to wear a light gray colored contact lens over my dark brown eyes so that both eyes appeared light gray in color. One day, a poetry reading contest was held in my area. I should have considered this to be an excellent opportunity for me because I used to be a very good poetry reader. But I stopped due to the people making fun of my eyes. So when I learned about the contest, I wasn't as excited as I normally would have been. Nevertheless, my mom encouraged me to take part in the contest. As I considered my mom to be my best friend, I took her advice. The day of the contest arrived. It was being held in the National City Theater with a panel of judges. There were some of the highly regarded poets in the country. A huge audience had bought tickets to attend the event. The competition was fierce because there were many skilled poets in there, and they were very confident. As for myself, I was worried and nervous. I wore sunglasses to hide my mismatched eyes. This was part of my presentation, but no one knew that. I could hear some people whispering behind my back, wondering why the stupid girl was wearing sunglasses inside a building. I heard a good number of silly, stupid, hurtful whispered comments. In due course, my turn came, and I went up on stage and began my reading. The audience mumbled to each other as I read. The judges seemed to be pleased. The poem I was reading was about my genetic peculiarity. At a suitable point, I removed my sunglasses to reveal what my poem was about. My mismatched eye colors. I expected gasps of shock or laughter from the audience, but nothing happened. The audience continued listening quietly and respectfully. After I finished my reading, the audience applauded warmly. Mom was crying tears of joy and pride. I was pleasantly surprised by the audience response. I honestly had expected much worse. Well, I didn't win the contest. I wasn't the best poet by a long shot. But what I gained was much more. Pride and confidence in knowing that I had faced my fear and gained acceptance from everyone there. Now I have a new nickname, Wonder Eyes.
With all the problems and crises that we face in our lives, we need someone to offer us support and encouragement, even if it's just a simple word. At least some acknowledgement of your suffering makes you feel secure in knowing that you are not alone, which makes you feel you have the power to keep going. But what if the opposite happened? You would sink into a deeper pit of despair unless you are exceptionally strong indeed. This is what my story is about. My name is Brandon, and I am 25 years old. My family was very poor. I was the third of 6 siblings. We suffered from poverty, humiliation, and near starvation. Dad had long ago succumbed to drugs and alcohol to hold his despair at bay. We woke up every day expecting to find him dead from an overdose. I was different than most of my family. I had dreams. I was determined to rise up out of poverty and raise my standard of living. I tried various jobs to earn and save money. I liked architectural work, so I began studying knowledge in this field. I saved a little money, but not enough to change my life yet. I began to take risks to earn more money. Risk, loss, gain. This was bona fide business. For me, sometimes I lost and sometimes I gained, but I always learned a great deal either way. Unfortunately, I neglected my health in pursuit of money. Remember I mentioned something about someone to support you? Well, that person in my life was Martina, my guardian angel, my friend, my neighbor, and my love. Every time I was about to give up, her sweet advice and encouragement would salvage my soul and lift my spirit. She would tell me that I must keep going to reach my goals. I wanted to tell her that I had done all that I had done just for her. Starting my company was her idea. I knew it was a big risk, but I trusted her to guide me. Initially, my earnings were low, but I learned from my mistakes. Slowly, I was able to save some money. Step by step, Martina was with me all the way. Finally, I became a successful businessman and gained a modicum of wealth. Eventually, I grew from one company to several companies and owned 3 or 4 cars. My brothers worked for me and had their own money saved in the bank. I bought a new villa for Mom, including a number of housekeepers. I was pleased to give Mom the better life she deserved. What's that, you ask? What about Martina? Did you imagine that I could forget about my inspiration and reason for living? No. We got married and lived together happily in a new villa. Despite all the problems at work, our relationship wasn't affected. I provided her whatever she wanted: money, clothes, jewelry. I owed her that much after all. I thought I had achieved my dream at last, but I didn't know that I had only set myself up for a very precipitous fall. My downfall began when I was in a meeting and suddenly felt terribly painful contractions in my stomach. As usual, I ignored my health-related symptoms, figuring that my mental discipline would overcome any physical weakness. All my energy went into maintaining the prosperity of my companies, but the pain didn't subside. As a matter of fact, it became recurrent and each time was worse than the one before it. Martina was worried and told me to go see a doctor. I was reluctant. Work demanded so much of my time, but she insisted, so I decided to put her mind at ease and go see a doctor. She, Mom, and my siblings are the most important things in my life. I predicted that the doctor would tell me that it was nothing to worry about. He would simply tell me to take 2 aspirin, drink plenty of fluids, and get lots of rest. So I went to a doctor who was a friend of mine. We didn't talk about my fatigue at work. He laughed because he knew that I preferred to chat and leave without any examination at all. He began examining me. I watched his face and saw his features go from relaxed to concerned to worried. He started re-examining my body parameters that he had already examined, as if to double-check something that he missed the first time. His look of worry grew deeper every time he checked something. I asked him if everything was okay, but I began to suspect what the answer would be. Once he finished his examination, he released the tension that had been building in his body. He looked me in the eyes. He asked me when I had begun feeling tired all the time. I told him it had been that way for quite a while. He was delaying telling me what he had found, trying to spare me from hearing the really bad news, I could tell. I told him to let it out, to be honest with me. The doctor took a deep breath and told me that I had advanced stage colon cancer, the last stage to be exact. He said that treatment wouldn't help at this stage. It was too late for corrective actions to arrest or reverse the condition. Then I broke out into hysterical laughter. "You must be joking, Doc. What do you mean by the last stage? There isn't any such thing, right?" I insisted. The doctor was holding back tears. "I'm sorry. I hated to break this news to you. I knew it would come as a terrible shock at this stage of your life with so much going for you." I was stunned, unable to speak. Martina came in. She saw our expressions and became worried and asked the doctor what he had found out. I told her it was nothing, but she knew immediately that I was lying. So I told her the truth. Strangely, Martina received the news stoically. She tried to reassure me that everything would be all right, that my health was good. She said we can see more expert doctors to help solve this problem. She was so strong, so confident, despite the shock of the bad news. But her facade of confidence belied a dark secret. I started radiation and chemical therapies in the hopes of a miracle happening. These treatments kept me away from work for a considerable time. When I finally returned to work one day, one of my trusted employees pulled me aside and said that he had to discuss a critical matter with me. He hesitantly told me that Martina was cheating on me. I smiled at him and said that he must surely be mistaken. But he continued, saying that Martina had made a deal with my lawyer. They spent a lot of time together and had signed a lot of papers. He said that a lot of things had happened while I was gone. He cautioned me to be careful. My health continued to deteriorate. I couldn't imagine Martina betraying me. The very idea was absurd. She was the reason for my success. Martina seemed to avoid me and seldom ask about my health, which seemed to reinforce the warning of my trusted employee. When I got home one evening, I told her what the employee had told me. She denied everything, of course. What did I expect her to say? She said that she was just conducting routine company legalities with my lawyer. I told her that I needed her support during my chemotherapy because it was so physically and emotionally draining. Then I asked her why she was suddenly so busy when she had always been at my side before now. Her veneer dropped, and her response shocked me. And what kind of future do I have with someone whose days in the world are numbered? I was speechless. So she continued. I had to guarantee my future, she explained. I replied, but your future is with me. I love you. Love has no value now, she said. Money is everything. I had the lawyer sign ownership of all your companies over to me. I own them now, legally and officially. I looked at her as if I were seeing her for the first time. It was incredulous that Martina would do such a thing. She said, I'm sorry, but life is uncertain. You're fired. Now please go. I stared at her. I wanted to attack her, to strike her, to smash her greedy little face, but I couldn't. I was so weak from the cancer and the chemotherapy that all I could do was to stand there helpless and dumbfounded. So now I had returned to poverty with poor health to boot. I had lost my faith in people and lost confidence in myself. I was crushed, beaten, fallen. I didn't know what to do, but I was still hopeful that some miracle would happen, so I decided not to give up just quite yet. First, I had to recover. I knew a doctor who could perhaps cut out the cancerous part of the colon to extend my time on this earth a little bit longer. Unfortunately, the operation was expensive, and I was now penniless. I needed a plan B. I needed to get my money back, and I needed to regain my strength. I returned to my first small office when I was just starting out. I was armed with my experience and close relationships that I had carefully nurtured and cultivated over time. Would that suffice to start me over? So I began again, from scratch. Slowly, gradually, I rose from the ashes like a phoenix. My brothers aided me. My new company became self-sustaining. The next shock I received was from my big brother. He handed me a large sum of money that he and my other brothers had gathered. It was to pay for my surgery. He said they were all behind me, and that they expected me to pay them back with interest. Then he smiled. Family. That's who you can really depend on in times of crisis. I hugged him and cried. I had my surgery and spent some time convalescing in the hospital. In the meantime, my brothers were managing my company and investing our money wisely. After a while, I was discharged from the hospital with a clean bill of health, and I was determined to get back every penny that my dear, accursed Maria had taken from me. I was so looking forward to making her regret betraying me after all the things I gave her and did for her. Months went by, and my reputation was restored in the name of my new company, and my loyal customers left Martina's company to deal with my new company. Martina had mismanaged her companies, and they now were in trouble. I took advantage of this situation and slowly began quietly buying shares in her companies to the point where I obtained 52%, a majority ownership. Then I blithely notified Martina that I now owned her companies. She was livid, outraged. I had totally blindsided her. She had never seen this coming. She had figured that I had been long dead. Then I blithely notified Martina that I now owned her companies. She was livid, outraged. I had totally blindsided her. She had never seen this coming. She had figured that I had been long dead. But I had survived and come back stronger than ever. I took back all my property and companies, and now it was she that was left out in the cold. She had no one, and I still had my family.
7 years old can be a very critical age in a human's life. It's the year we graduate from first grade to second grade. It also may be the year when you first participate in a sport that will shape your future. But for me, it was the age when my parents decided they wanted to lead separate lives. I grew up like any average girl, attended a good preschool, participated in sports, and had good friends. My parents, as I recall, were always in a good mood with each other and shared the joy of raising their daughter together. I have few memories of the bad times my parents had argued. The worst memory I recall is lying in my bed one night when I was 7 years old and having my parents come into my room and my father saying, "Tanya, your mother and I are getting a divorce." My immediate reaction was a natural instinct for a young child, which was to blame myself. I often had more than one birthday party as a kid. This sounds cool, but it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. I'm a child of divorce. My childhood wasn't mine. It belonged to my parents. I lost myself in every effort to appease each side of my family. Shuffling alone between two separate lives meant that I was on the fringe of each family, never an insider. The people I loved most were never in the same room together, and many of them barely even knew each other existed. I missed out on events and celebrations because I would have to spend time with my other family. Children of divorce learn to cope with these struggles and instability by the age of 10. I no longer wanted to deal with it. I didn't want to live in two different homes with two different bedrooms, different clothes, different toys, different friends, and even different rules. I was a 10-year-old caught between a rock and a hard place. So one day I told my dad that I didn't want to visit anymore. It was a courageous and ignorant act, to be honest. We will never know if it was the right decision or not. But at the time, neither one of my parents possessed the emotional stability it would have taken to unearth a more positive solution. And so that was the way things went. The power struggle that had lain dormant between my parents erupted again, and this time it was directed at me. This time I was responsible for the discord. In one house, I was blamed. In the other, I was a victim. There were no more multiple birthday parties. Instead, there was stability and consistency in one house, anger and avoidance in the other. Choice is met with consequences, and as time went on, I fell out of touch with my dad's family. It's hard to stay in touch with people connected to someone we have pushed away. Cousins I used to play with were erased from my life. We never visited again. Was that because it's best to keep served ties cut? Or was it my punishment for being a horrible child? All I knew was silence and loss. When I was in my early teens, my mom remarried and I met new cousins. I learned new Christmas traditions and sat with new kids at the dinner table. Instead of being ushered from one family to the other, life settled down. Even though I heard from my dad only once or twice a year, life was fairly stable. But that changed again when my mom and stepdad split up during my first year of university. I tried to keep in touch with my family members every time I went home for the holidays. Again, I tried to please everyone while anxiety flooded my thoughts. Whom should I spend Christmas Eve with? Should I visit with this family or that one? Will they be offended if I don't make time to see them? Will they be offended if I don't bring presents? I would have loved to have everyone drop by and visit me, but that would not have gone very well at my mom's house. Instead, I diligently visited everybody on my own, carrying thoughtful little presents I bought on my student budget. I would make small talk and feel like an outsider. I was always the awkward guest, never the welcoming host. For 10 years after I graduated from university, I lived away from home. Not a single family member from any one of my four families, save for my mom, came to visit, called, or even let me know when they flew through town. Yet, every time I went home for Christmas, I scheduled visits, bought presents, and made time to see as many people as I could. I did this to make them feel good, not me. 2 years ago, I moved back home, and now I live less than a day's drive away from all four of my families, their new spouses, and young kids. We're all connected on Facebook, but my mom is still the only person who ever calls or visits. When I hear that a family member passed through town but didn't call, it saddens me. But I realize that they don't call because they don't really know me. To them, I was never a fixture. I was only ever around a few Christmases here and there, and although they were my family, I was never theirs. They don't know that they are just one of several people spread across four different families that I wasn't able to keep in touch with. Sometimes divorce spreads us too thin to make anything real, lasting family connections. This summer, I am getting married and starting my family. I'm trying not to have too many expectations. I know no family is perfect, but my soon-to-be husband is the king at keeping in touch with people. He's persistent, charismatic, forgiving, and loyal. He's teaching me what family means. Together, we will teach our kids to reach out to one another with compassion and to stick by each other through times of darkness. I'm looking forward to joy and friendship with my new family, and I plan to do everything I can to stay married.
Have you ever dreamed of having some shocking surprise completely change your life? Whether this surprise is good or bad, your life will never be the same again. I have a story to tell you about this very thing. My name is Tiffany, and I'm 21 years old. I live with my parents and an occasional mystery guest, whose role in our lives I have yet to ascertain. I would see him from time to time. I assumed that he was some down-on-his-luck guy whom Dad helped once. Dad was wealthy and often donated money to help the poor. This mystery man would try to talk to me whenever he would spend a few days with us. I didn't understand why Dad allowed him to stay at our home sometimes. It was bizarre, and it did creep me out a little. There was one time when he opened the door to my room while I was sleeping. He sat on the bed next to me for a while and then left. I was half awake at the time, but I didn't move. When I told my parents about this, they said they would speak with him, but I'm not sure they ever did. I felt uneasy about the situation, so I decided to investigate this matter myself. I had to figure out who this mystery man was and why he stayed with us periodically. One day, Mom wasn't feeling well, and Dad drove her to the doctor's office to be checked out, leaving me home alone. I sneaked into the office to have a look around, see if I could find something about this strange man. While I was searching, I heard a voice behind me. I thought it was my parents, but it was the mystery man. He was smiling at me. It made me feel awkward. He said hi. I stepped back and said, "If you take one step closer, I'll scream." He said, "Calm down. You're suffering from an illness, and I need you to fight it for me and for your parents." "What are you talking about? I feel fine," I said. He said, "You don't recognize me. I'm your husband." Shocked, I grabbed the phone to call the police, but he stopped me. "Don't do that. I won't hurt you, but I won't leave either." I started screaming loudly. Just at that time, my parents returned and entered the study. I shouted for them to help me. Dad came over and hugged me. Then I felt a needle prick the back of my neck, and I lost consciousness. I woke up in a hospital bed, with my parents and my so-called husband beside me. I asked them what was going on. They told me that I must have been dreaming, that I had just woken up from a week-long coma, induced by a rare type of brain disease that damaged my long-term memory. My husband hugged me and told me that he loved me. If only I knew who he was. Our feelings are always hard to control. We are humans after all. Sometimes we do things we can't explain, just because we feel that way. I had a student named Daniel, a sweet and innocent child. I was prepared to do anything for him, but don't judge me just yet. First, let me tell you my story. My name is Jolene. I'm a 21-year-old math teacher at a primary school. I live with my sister and my mother. My house was next to the school where I work. I love teaching, and I like teaching the students in creative ways. They loved me, and I loved them. Daniel was a special student, though. Our story began at the start of the new year. It was the first day of school. I missed all my students over the summer break. I missed them so much that I stood by the door to welcome them back. Before I started my first lesson, Mr. Smith, the student affairs officer, knocked on the class door, with Daniel hiding behind his back. Mr. Smith greeted the class and asked them to greet Daniel, but Daniel was too shy and didn't move. So I went over to him to take him by the hand, but he pulled his hand away, which embarrassed Mr. Smith. I asked him to greet his classmates, so he went and he stood in front of the class and he said, "Hello, I am Daniel." Then he went and he sat at the very back of the class. He didn't talk much with the other kids. He didn't like to interact with anyone. Daniel always looked sad, and I thought to myself, he's only 8. What could possibly have made him that way? I tried to get close to him, but he resisted all my efforts. Sometimes he looked like he was hiding some big secret, and later on, I learned what it was. One night, when I was surfing the social media, I came across a horrible news story about a jealous husband killing his wife and another man right in front of his son. The child had been none other than my new student Daniel. Reading that sad story, I started understanding why Daniel was acting that way. I decided to try brightening his life a little. Every day, I would buy a small present and put it on his desk. At first, it had no effect, but slowly he came to love that. During break time, I would sit beside him, and we would share food together. I would get him involved in class activities. On his birthday, I arranged a surprise party with his class, his grandmother, and myself. He was so happy that day. After the party, he hugged me and he told me that he loved me. I hugged him tightly. He was not just a student to me. I treated him like he was my own son. He told me that he wanted to call me mother, and that made me so happy. After his grandmother died, he came to live with me. We faced a lot of problems together, but I followed his success in life with pride. Daniel is all grown up now. He's graduating from the Faculty of Engineering. I am so proud of what he has made of himself.
Could you live with yourself if you found out your whole life turned out to be a lie? That you are not who you thought you were? My story may strike you as a silly Hollywood drama, but every word of it is true, I swear. My name is Tasha, and I am 19 years old. I am in the 12th grade, and I live with my family in a posh mansion. I was an only child, so my parents spoiled me by giving me everything I could ask for. Love, protection, the finest education, material things. My father always worried for my safety. He was so protective that it annoyed me, though I loved him for it. I lived the life that every teenager could only dream about. I had a car, money, and the ability to travel the world if I so desired. The only strain on my existence, as it were, was when I discovered a secret about my life, which is what this story is about. It was the first day of a new school year. The school day was over, and I was walking home with my friends when I noticed a woman standing across the street. She was watching me closely, as if she knew me. Perhaps I resembled one of her friends or relatives. This situation repeated itself on many occasions. Her stalking of me made me feel uneasy, even though she didn't look threatening in the least. So one day, I decided to exit out of the back side of the school instead of the front side. Then I peeked around the corner of the school building to observe her. She was scanning the exiting students carefully, one by one. She looked annoyed that she couldn't find me. Then I sneaked around behind her and tapped her on the shoulder. When she turned around and saw me, her face lit up with joy. I told her that I had seen her watching me every day and asked her why she was doing so. It seemed that she wanted to burst into a lengthy conversation, but instead she stopped herself and calmly handed me a letter. Then she began crying and left me quickly. I resisted opening the letter until I got home, sat down, and got comfortable. Then I proceeded to open the letter. It contained a calendar date and a simple note. Research this date and you will know everything. I browsed the internet for events that happened on that date. There were many hits. One hit was a news article about a woman who had killed her husband. Her husband had been constantly abusing her and her baby girl, so the woman had sold her daughter to a rich man to protect her life. When her husband discovered what she had done, he began beating her severely, and in self-defense, she killed him. I was shocked to read that the rich man she had sold the baby to was none other than my dad. I felt like I was in an Asian Indian movie. I'm in a quandary as to what I should do. Do you have any suggestions? Any advice? Please.
Why am I covering my face, you ask? Why would I wear a hoodie and cover my face with a veil? Your brain is probably going to go for the obvious. Illness, health issue, ugliness, or maybe an old wrinkled face. But that's not exactly true. Let me take off my hoodie and remove my veil. There, see? I'm actually not that bad. Well, except for those large, smooth, white spots on my face. I have a skin condition called vitiligo. I'm Bella. My name is supposed to mean beautiful. I'm 17 years old, yet people view me as a monster because of my appearance. People shy away from me. They think they can catch whatever it is I have. They fear me, but they have no need to, really. Vitiligo is harmless, nothing more than a skin pigmentation defect. It is not contagious, and it won't rub off you. But society fears those who are different. No one wants to be near me. I have only one friend. Her name is Laura. Before I developed vitiligo, I had a great childhood. I used to laugh, play music and sing, and I had many friends. My parents and my friends enjoyed my singing and thought that I might become a famous singer one day. My hobbies included reading, watching movies, and playing sports. I excelled in gymnastics and even won a few awards. The days passed merrily. Then one day, I mysteriously got a headache and became fatigued, and I noticed a white spot on my body. I showed it to my parents, and they looked worried. They took me to the doctor, who examined me and diagnosed the problem as a skin disorder called vitiligo. My father was concerned and asked the doctor if it was dangerous. She explained to him that it was harmless, just a skin discoloration issue. My mother asked if it was contagious, but the doctor said no, not to worry. It can't and it won't spread to anyone else. I felt like I was in a dream that turned into a nightmare. The doctor tried to reassure me that it was simply a skin disorder, not a disease, and that it could be treated to some extent. It initially spread all over my body from shoulders down, causing me to wear long-sleeved blouses and gloves. Then one day, the spots appeared on my face. When my friends noticed the spots, I told them about vitiligo, but they didn't believe me when I said it wasn't contagious. They began to avoid me. Even my little siblings seemed to be afraid to hang around me. One of them even called me a monster. I hated myself, hated this affliction, hated my circumstances. It felt like I was all alone in the world, and nothing really mattered anymore. I gave up everything: music, gymnastics, reading. Though my parents encouraged me, I was totally depressed. But as the saying goes, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. So I decided to try and make the best out of the hand that life had dealt me. Besides my parents, my friend Laura was the only person who supported me in accepting my condition and moving on with my life. Her support meant a lot to me. Sometimes we would spend hours sitting down without speaking. We felt comfortable and safe in each other's company. One day, Laura told me that she had a surprise for me. I told her that nothing could surprise me, but to go ahead and tell me anyway. She said there was a talent contest on a local channel, and that she signed me up to participate in it. I was shocked. I had long forgotten about singing. Laura enthusiastically told me that I had to get back into the habit of singing again, and that I needed to send them a recording of my singing. Initially, I resolutely refused. But in the end, she finally persuaded me to do it, so I submitted a recording of my singing. Laura was pleasantly surprised. She said my voice was beautiful. I sang a rather sad song, and after finishing it, she hugged me. She told me that the results would be released in 3 days. I waited anxiously, and I hadn't felt that way in a long time. 3 days later, I received a call from Laura. Her voice seemed sad, and I immediately knew that I had been rejected from entering the contest. But then she let her true excitement show, and she shouted in the handset that I had been accepted to participate in the competition. I screamed with joy. My parents heard the commotion and asked me what had happened. When I told them, they were ecstatic. I wanted to change people's minds about vitiligo, so I came up with a plan. The day of the contest arrived. The program would be live. My parents, Laura, and I went to the studio to await my turn. There were a lot of participants, all of whom seemed to have beautiful voices that were much more melodious than mine. Oh, I forgot to tell you that I was wearing my usual hoodie, gloves, and face veil again. I tried to stay calm until my turn, but Laura was talking non-stop, and my parents were encouraging me the whole time. After a while, the host came and told me to get ready, that I was the next act up. I patiently waited for my turn, off the side of the stage, listening to them call the name of the singer that preceded me. The audience and judges had clapped loudly for him. He had sung beautifully. I suddenly felt panic. I thought of running back home, but Laura gently put her hand on my shoulder and quietly told me to believe in myself, just as she believed in me. These words calmed me down. They were all I needed. Then they called my name. I took a deep breath and went out onto the stage. The stage lights were so bright, the audience seemed too many to count. I could see the judges wondering and whispering among themselves about my covered head, hands, and face. One of them asked me to introduce myself, and I did. Another one was overcome by curiosity and asked me why my hands and face were covered, and I replied saying that I had a personal reason for doing so. Then they told me to begin. My heart was racing. It felt like it would burst out of my chest. I froze. I couldn't move my mouth. I looked at Laura and my parents. I heard a member of the audience snidely remarking that I was going to sing silently. Another one remarked, somewhat loudly, that he thought my voice was horrible and that I should get off stage. Several members of the audience began to laugh, but my resolution was firm. I had decided to give it my best shot. I closed my eyes and opened my mouth and began to sing. I sang with all my heart. As I was singing, I was thinking of my past suffering, of the friends who had abandoned me, of all the embarrassing moments. I began to cry. When I finished, I was snapped out of my mental reverie by the sound of loud clapping. I opened my eyes and I was awed to see the audience stand on their feet just to clap for me. The judges were smiling broadly and clapping as well. After a short time, one judge motioned the audience to quiet down. "Your voice touched our hearts," they said, "and we enjoyed every word you sang." I motioned to him that I would like to say something, and he nodded and sat down. I launched into my planned speech. When I first walked out onto the stage, you asked me why I was covering my hands and face. Now that everyone has heard me sing and honored me so kindly with applause, I would like to answer the judge's question. Your accepting and honoring me as a singer has encouraged me to do so. I pulled back my hoodie and removed my gloves and veil. I spoke softly into the mic. My name is Bella, and you can see from my hands and my face that I have a skin condition called vitiligo. Because of my appearance, I have been called a monster. My friends abandoned me because I no longer looked normal to them. People blame me for my illness. This made me hate my life. This skin condition wasn't my choice. My parents and my only friend Laura encouraged me to participate in this competition, though I didn't want to. I was terrified to have to show my face in public, but I chose to come here today and reveal my face to draw attention to the plight of people like me, people who suffer from vitiligo, to show everyone here that I am not a monster, that I am not ill, that I have feelings just like you do. So please, do not be afraid of people like me with the skin disorder. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Then I heard one member of the audience slowly begin to clap, then 2, then 3, and suddenly the whole hall burst into applause. I looked off stage. My parents and Laura were all crying. The audience began chanting my name. One of the judges came over to me and hugged me and said that from now on, people would call me an angel instead. I must have been crying because my face was all wet. I was finally proud of myself. I had accepted the challenge and won the day. I was most definitely not a monster anymore.
Falling in love with a knight in shining armor riding on a white stallion is the dream of every girl. I would want him to be tall, blonde-haired, green-eyed, handsome, and strong. Imagine him along with me if you can. But what I never expected in a million years was to actually meet my knight in shining armor. Lend me your ear and listen to my knight's tale. My name is Meredith, and I am 17 years old. I live with my mom and my little sister Susan, who is 3 years younger than me. Susan and I fight a lot, as sisters are wont to do. She is more beautiful than me. I am short and fat, but don't blame me. You should blame my mother for being an excellent cook. She used to work in a famous restaurant. You can't imagine how tasty her food is. Mom uses me as her laboratory rat or guinea pig. Whenever she cooks any new dish, she has me try it out and give her my opinion. As a result of all my taste testing, I've become an obese food addict. I know that my obesity may be an obstacle in finding my heroic knight. My best friends are Ellen, Selena, and Mary. My first date was with a guy named Mark. He was a crazy one. Torn clothes, long, dirty hair, a furtive manner. And his paranoid eyes were always darting around, looking everywhere. At our first meeting, he gave me a silly present that, when open, sprang a fake frying pan into my face. My next meeting was with Michael. He was subdued and weird. On our first date, he sat silent for 2 hours and barely spoke at all. All my friends' matchmaking attempts failed miserably. Then Ellen suggested that I open a Facebook account and try to find my dream mate online. I didn't like the idea at first, but I took a chance, opened an account, and shared some personal information about myself and my interests. My first friend request was from Mark. Yeah, that Mark. I blocked his request immediately. I received more friend requests from various people, some interesting, some plain and boring. I kept waiting for my knight on a white horse to send me a friend request. Then one day, I got a friend request from a boy named Joaquin. I visited his Facebook page and saw that he was handsome and active in sports. I accepted his request and sent him a message to say hello and waited all night for his response. Just when I was about to lose hope, he surprised me and responded. I tried to control myself even though my mind was already racing ahead and planning our wedding. We chatted online that day for around 3 hours. I told him about my family, hobbies, etc. But eventually he had to excuse himself to go to an exercise class. However, he promised that he would continue our chat later. I sent him a rolling on the floor laughing emoji and asked, "Are you serious?" He replied, "Of course, I want to get to know you better." I called my friends and told them everything. They advised caution, but I didn't listen to them. In my mind, I had already fallen in love with Joaquin. I clutched my phone, waiting for his next message with bated breath. I figured that I should probably let him know what I really looked like, a fat food addict, before we got too far into a relationship. When he got home, he sent me a message, and I asked him about himself and his family. He told me about his dreams, his family, and his dream girl. He told me that he wasn't interested in a girl's figure at all. The important thing was her character. We agreed to meet the next day. I was excited. I called my friends immediately and updated them on my news. Later, I received a message from Joaquin stating the time and place of our upcoming meeting. I chose some chic clothes and got ready to go. Mom saw me and was surprised that I had dressed up so. Susan laughed at me. "She looks like she's going to a restaurant," said my darling little sister. I announced, "I am going on a date, Mum. I met someone on Facebook." Mum said, "Okay, have a good time, and come back and tell us all about it when you return." My heart was beating in my ears as I raced to our meeting place. After I arrived, I sent Joaquin a message telling him that I was waiting for him outside. He replied that he had prepared a surprise for me and that I should come inside. So I hurried inside to see what surprise he had planned. My mind ran wild with possibilities. When I entered the place, I saw my friends holding up a banner with my name on it. Ellen said, "Don't be upset, Meredith, but your surprise is that we are Joaquin." They had played a prank on me as a birthday surprise. Oh, I was so angry. Do you mean to tell me that Joaquin, the love of my life, was all a hoax? You are not my friends. You are devils. But then Ellen opened a box and showed me its contents. A nice, big, plump, glazed blueberry tart. I stopped my angry ranting. My mouth closed. I became silent and calmed down. My heartbeat rate slowed. They all hugged me. They said that I was a beautiful girl, and they had just wanted to make me happy for my birthday. I was stuffing the blueberry tart in my mouth when the waiter came to take our orders. I looked at him with a mouthful of food. He was so handsome. I mumbled, "What's your name?" as I was chewing my mouthful of blueberry tart. Try again, as they say.
I don't believe in ghosts, evil spirits, haunted houses, metaphysics, etc. I only believe in science and facts. But sometimes things happen that shred all your beliefs. I want to introduce myself. I'm Lisa. I'm 14 years old. I live with my mom, dad, and grandmother. And they're all very proud of me. I'm the leader of the science club at school, and I've been the perfect student for the past 2 years. My hobbies are reading, watching educational videos, and learning. I like to discuss matters with rational people, not those who believe in myths, aliens, ghosts, and other such nonsense. I personally think these people have mental issues. One morning, my grandmother passed away. I was sad for a long time because I missed her so much. On the day of her funeral, the whole city must have come to say goodbye. While the priests were praying, I noticed something peculiar about one of the graves in the graveyard. After the prayer ended, I approached the grave in question to investigate. There was some weird writing on it. Then, a wispy, transparent, smoky figure appeared out of nowhere. It said to me, "Do not get closer to Donna Median's grave. Beware." I shivered slightly and asked the apparition who Donna was. And it replied. Who was she? She was an evil witch who liked to scare people. She was burned at the stake as a witch, but before her death, she swore a curse that if anyone ever approached her grave, her ghost would haunt that person to the day they die. I did not laugh at the apparition's warning. Instead, I turned and returned home, thinking about what had happened. On a sudden defiant impulse, I decided to visit that grave that night to see for myself if the curse was real. I took my dad's flashlight and wore a raincoat. It was pitch black outside. The place was horribly unsettling at night, but I wasn't worried at all. It's not like it was real, right? I entered the gate to the sound of howling dogs and meowing cats. My blood ran cold, and a sudden chill ran through me. I turned on the flashlight and began searching for the grave. My hands were trembling so badly, I dropped the flashlight several times. Sometimes I would step on something crunchy, and I would shine the light downward, only to see that I had stepped on an insect. Sometimes I'd see a cat here and there. Then suddenly, I heard an eerie sound close by. I froze, not daring to move. Slowly, I pointed my light towards the sound and gasped as my light illuminated a dark, shadowy figure. It was about my height and dressed all in black. I spun around and fled as rapidly as my faithful feet could carry me. I dove into bed, but I didn't sleep at all that night. I even left the lights on. The next day, when I woke up, I asked my dad if graveyards had ghosts, and he wondered why I would ask such a question. I was embarrassed and laughed to hide my fear. I told him that I was just curious. That was all. Dad looked at me suspiciously, but continued. I've heard stories, he said, that some people have seen a ghost of a girl from time to time beside Donna Median's grave. I felt my heart sink, and I asked slowly, "Is she about my height and dressed in black?" He replied, "Yes, that's how I've heard the ghost described." "How in the world did you know that?" I looked down casually and answered, "Oh, I read an article about it on the internet last night." My head hurt just thinking about this ghost thing. I made up my mind to prove or disprove it once and for all. I called my friend Laura and persuaded her to come with me to the grave. The following night, We met at the stroke of midnight, at the entrance to the graveyard. Laura was shaking and constantly casting glances right and left. The weather was rainy and gloomy. The ground was muddy, and cats were meowing everywhere. It would have made the perfect setting for a supernatural horror movie. While we were looking for Donna's grave, flying bats would occasionally startle Laura, causing her to scream alarmed. As we approached Donna's grave, we suddenly heard a sound behind us. We both turned around at the same time and screamed. A ghost was glaring at us. It asked angrily, "What are you doing beside my grandmother's grave?" Wait a minute. Are you girls? She uncovered her face, revealing that she was just a girl, and a beautiful one at that. She told us that her name was Carmen and asked me to turn off the flashlight because it hurt her eyes. I did. Then I asked, "Who are you?" She replied, "I'm the 5th grandchild of Donna Median, the poor woman in this grave who has been wrongly accused." We both whispered back, "Wrongly accused?" She continued saying, "Yes, she was a victim of the Holocaust during World War II. Afterwards, she became a simple doctor who treated people who were afflicted with epilepsy. As usual, there are always some small-minded, superstitious people looking to make trouble for others. They accused her of being a witch because they considered epilepsy to be a disease caused by a demon's touch. I come here every day to put flowers on her grave. People have mistaken me for a ghost because I only come at night. I don't want people to know I'm related to someone they think to be a witch. I don't want to be shunned, scorned, or gossiped about." I tried to comfort her and calm her a little by saying, "Don't worry, Carmen. Your grandmother's spirit may be able to rest in peace if you tell people the truth now. We live in more modern times, and there's no need to worry. I won't tell anyone about you being the ghost. It'll be our little secret." Carmen laughed. She and I became good friends after that. Ever since that day, whenever I hear someone talking about ghosts, I just look at the photo I took of Carmen and I break out laughing.
These things could be considered blessings from God, especially if you are very successful in all aspects of your life. You should be very grateful and appreciate all these gifts, because if you take them for granted and then lose them, you will regret it deeply. Believe me, I know. And my story is how I know. My name is Chris. I am 39 years old and am a news presenter for a local TV channel. I grew up in a poor family. My dad was a low-paid laborer, and I had no desire to follow in his footsteps, so I decided to get a job in life as fast as possible to begin earning money early in life. I first worked as a grocery clerk in sales in a packaging plant. After that, I worked at a lot of different jobs, earning money to support my family and my studies. I earned good grades at my university in the Faculty of Mass Communications, so I would have a chance at getting my dream job of being a news presenter. And I succeeded. In my first job as a news presenter for a local TV channel, it was my duty to prepare programs. Being a news presenter had always been a dream of mine. I was young and wanted to be famous and well-known as a TV personality. It was not as easy as I thought it would be, but I was finally able to eventually achieve my dream of becoming a famous news presenter. I was able to move my family into a bigger house. I married a girl whom I loved and with whom I had 2 children. My life was moving along smoothly in accordance with my plans in life. But fate doesn't like happy endings, it seems, and my life took a dark turn. Once I became famous, my work took more and more of my time and energy, and the added stress required to maintain that success at work began taking a toll on my personal life. I began losing interest in my family and started ignoring them, and my friends as well. Spending too much time at work caused me to miss important things in my life, like my kids' and my friends' birthdays, my wedding anniversary, time with my parents, and intimate time with my wife. Ignoring my wife and family caused many domestic arguments. These increased over time and began to affect my work. I even began ignoring Mom and Dad, causing my relationship with them to worsen as well. Dad blamed me for seeking luxury and fame at the expense of my family. It was hurtful to hear such criticism from Dad. Eventually, he and Mom decided to leave our new flat and return to the old one. My life was being turned upside down.
I became so stressed out and irritable that friction with my wife and my kids caused my wife to threaten to leave me and take the kids with her. We ended up quarreling about this even, and I drove them away as well. Fame had improved my life up to a certain point, but was now destroying my life. As I saw it, I had two options: continue down this path and continue destroying my life, or accept that fate had given me a wake-up call, that I need to rethink my life and change course. Also at this time of deep contemplation, I began getting severe headaches, like migraine headaches that worsen day by day. A friend of mine recommended that I go see a doctor, so I took his advice. I went to a doctor who was quite well known, and he told me that I had a tumor in my brain. Woe is me. Was this downhill trend in my life ever going to stop? I guess not, because then he continued with more bad news. That I just had 30 days to live. I didn't know what to do. First, I called Dad. I knew that he was upset with me, as were my friends, wife, and kids. It seemed that I might be doomed to die alone. I began reminiscing about the good old days, when my nice home was filled with happiness and my children laughing, playing, and shouting. But now, it sat silent and empty. Having only 30 days to live, I felt that I needed to fix my life before it was too late. So I took action. I took a vacation from work and went to visit Mom and Dad. After hugging and talking to them, my eyes were filled with tears. Learning what I had given up in pursuit of success tore at my heartstrings. They asked about my health, and I concealed my condition and told them I was quite well. I apologized for my past bad behavior and promised them that I would change for the better. Dad forgave me because he didn't want to see me so sad and miserable, so I was able to reconcile with both of them. Mom asked about my wife and kids, and upon learning that they had left me, she said that I needed to reconcile with them too. I told her that I would do that I planned to fix everything. So I returned to our old home and was putting some flowers on the doorstep when my wife happened to open the door to find me there. I tearfully asked her to forgive me and to move back into our new home to live with me again. I promised them that making them happy would be my only purpose in life from that point forward. The strange thing is that I not only changed for the better, but I was even better than I was before things had gotten worse. I spent all my time with my parents, my family, and my friends. We met every week to gather fun and barbecue cookout parties. During my spiritual renaissance, my renewed enjoyment of life, my phone kept ringing a lot, but I figured it was just the doctor with more bad news, so I ignored it. Then one day, I gathered all the family together and told them the truth. That I was going to die very soon. It was a major shock to everyone. My wife fainted, and my parents and kids were all crying. Finally, I was ready to answer the numerous phone calls that had been coming in. They were from the lab. The lab technician informed me that they had mixed up my medical records with someone else's, and that person had died within the predicted 30 days. However, I was off the hook. They apologized profusely for their mistake and hung up. I was so ecstatic. If there's really a cloud 9, then I was there. I walked outside and looked up at the clear blue sky with my eyes full of tears, basking in the warmth of the sun and savoring the cool breeze of life teasing at my hair and face. Fate had given me another chance, and I did not intend to waste it the second time around. I would live the rest of my life as if I only had 30 days to live.
I don't know where to begin. I don't want to live alone. I'm fed up. I need someone to talk to laugh with, to play with. I've been lonely since birth. My name is Bella, and I'm 10 years old. And this is my story. I lived with my parents in a nice, quiet neighborhood. My father was an engineer, and my mother was a housewife. Father used to travel a lot, but my mom always stayed home with me. Father was always busy. Whenever I asked him to play with me, he'd play with me for a while. Then he'd get a phone call and leave me by myself. Mother was always worried about me. She feared everything on the street, from friends to neighbors. My neighborhood didn't have any kids for me to play with. My parents used to fight a lot. I often saw Mother with her face colored blackish blue. Whenever I would ask her about it, she wouldn't reply. I didn't have any friends because Mother didn't want me to have any. I guess she was afraid they would hurt me. I don't know. One time, my parents were sitting together, and I asked Father why I didn't have any brothers or sisters. He told me to ask Mother, but Mother would just sit there silently, without answering. Later, there came a time when Father grabbed Mother and began beating her. I tried to pull him away from her, screaming, "Leave her alone! Let her go!" He slapped me hard, and I fell down. The last thing I heard before I lost consciousness was my mom screaming. I woke up later in the hospital to see my mom crying. She asked me if I was okay, and I nodded. When we returned home, my father wasn't there. I asked Mom where he was, but she simply said that he left on a very long business trip. I was feeling a little sad, but Mom surprised me with a doll. This was the first time that Mom had ever given me a doll. She said that doll would be like my little sister. I hugged it tightly and said to it, "Nancy, you and I are going to be the best sisters ever." Mom often left me with Nancy when she had to go out to do business. It was okay though. I felt that Nancy could understand me whenever I spoke to her. Time passed quickly. One day, Mom came home tired and went to sleep on the couch. I made a tent in my room where I collected all of my toys and played with Nancy. I was speaking to Nancy and telling her how beautiful she was and how I felt lucky to have her as a sister. Then I asked her, "Nancy, do you know why Father left us?" Miraculously, Nancy answered me, saying, "Father left you because he never really loved you to begin with." I was shocked and took 2 steps back. Then I said with a trembling voice, "Nancy, you can speak?" Nancy answered and said, "Of course. Can't all dolls?" From that moment on, Nancy and I lived in our own private little world. We didn't let anyone know about this. It was our secret. Once, when we were sitting alone, Nancy said to me, "Bella, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" I asked. Then she said the strangest thing. "You have to leave this world because you deserve a better one." That didn't make sense. Actually, it felt more like a threat. It frightened me, and I called for Mom. When she came in, I told her what Nancy had just said to me. She replied saying, "Nonsense, Bella. Nancy is just a doll. She can't talk. Maybe you're just tired. Get some sleep." So I tried to sleep, but Nancy wouldn't let me sleep. She left me alone until midnight, then she woke me up. She put her hand over my mouth and whispered, "Please listen to me. Don't scream, okay?" she said. "I know all your fears, your father's cruelty, your loneliness, your love for me, how your love and belief in me transformed me from a toy to a sentient doll. I really love you, Bella, and I want you to be happy." Her words calmed me down, and I said, "You're right, Nancy. So what do we do then?" She explained her plan to me. "In 2 days' time, we'll run away from home to a place called Toyland, where we'll meet some great friends." Whenever Mom was busy with work, I would speak and laugh with Nancy. And whenever Mom would enter the room and ask me who I was speaking to, I would laugh and point at Nancy. I could see in Mom's eyes that she was beginning to worry about me. One day, as Nancy and I were preparing our stuff to escape, we were looking at a map we had prepared. Then, unexpectedly, Mom came into the room. She saw the map and asked me about it. I looked at Nancy, and she gestured with her eyes that I shouldn't say anything. Seeing this, Mom took Nancy and threw her into the trash can. I screamed and pleaded. That was all I remember. Hi, my name is Esmeralda, and I'm 21 years old. In my country, I was a heroine, a patriotic soldier, and a role model for my generation. But every story has a dark side, and the dark side of my story is that I became a traitor to my own country. I have to tell you my story quickly because, Well, you'll find out shortly. My spy career began when some terrorists attacked my country. I was assigned to a counter-terrorism battalion, and we were fighting for our lives. Though we were a strong group, the terrorists were suicidal maniacs who had decimated our troops by just charging into our midst and detonating their explosive vests. Only a few of us survived, fighting against overwhelming odds. Then, an opportunity revealed itself. I noticed that the terrorists were hiding behind some large pipes, natural gas pipelines. As a matter of fact, I shot the biggest pipe and killed them all. I became the heroine to a grateful nation, and suddenly, people were naming their children after me. Everyone wished to be like me. Then, one day, I received a phone call from an anonymous caller who threatened to kill my family if I didn't do what he demanded. So, I met with him and his cronies. The moment I saw him, I could see that he meant business. He was a no-nonsense type of individual. Sure enough, he got straight down to business. He wanted me to tell them all our military secrets, weapons, plans, base, and camp locations, everything. If I didn't agree, they threatened to kill everyone in my family, starting with my father, who lived in another city. He said he was recording our meeting, said that if I betrayed this group, they would send the recording to my leaders. I submitted to their demands, because I couldn't bear to cause my family harm. I now had to wear two faces, the heroine and the treacherous informer. I was pleasantly surprised to find that they paid me well for the information I was passing them. My own country hadn't paid me a dime for being their national heroine. So, at least I felt valued and appreciated by the other side. The utility of the information I was supplying them became evident as I watched news reports of new successful terrorist attacks on our country, military bases, camps, and armories. Naturally, our top brass knew that there must be a traitor in their midst, but they had no suspects because I was being very careful. Then, one day, as I was meeting with my terrorist contact to pass on some more information, our soldiers burst into the room and took the terrorists into custody. It turns out that my side had suspected me and had followed me there. The officer told me that I was the last person he would have ever suspected of being a traitor. I offered my hands to him to be handcuffed and taken in. I figured at least 10 years in prison, but he made no move to handcuff me. Instead, he just looked at one of his lieutenants, who then pulled out his gun, pulled back its slide, and chambered a round. It seemed that my sentence was to be executed, right here, right now.
One of the best feelings in the world for any woman is being a mother. To have someone love you for who you are, for just being you, and expect nothing in return. You're the heroine of their story. You become everything they ever dreamed, and you'd give anything to see a smile on their face. I'm proud to say that I'm a mother to 50 kids. I know that's a lot, but let me tell you the story. I'm Susan, 20 years old. I come from a very rich family. My dad's Stefan Heiss, a very famous businessman. Yes, the owner of Heiss Cars Industry. My mom's Elena. She comes from a very rich family in Sweden. She married my dad and they built their life from scratch. I loved kids, ever since I was a kid. Sometimes I feel like they're walking cotton candy. Their laughs, their mischief. All the kids in our family loved me, and I loved them. Even my aunt said that I'd make a great mother someday. So did Henry. Henry was my childhood friend. We grew up together. We had the same interests, same hobbies. We even thought alike. We got married and started our life together. We were young, but our dreams were big. I was thrilled when I found out that I was pregnant, and Henry was so happy he couldn't believe it. He did everything he could to help me relax. He couldn't wait to be a father, but destiny had something else in store for us. We had just arrived from Sweden. Henry had a problem at work. He was talking on the phone while driving at high speed on a dangerous road. I tried to tell him to watch the road, but it was too late. A truck came out of nowhere and pushed our car off the side. We fell into the lake, and we were unconscious. When I woke up, I found my mother and Henry's mother both looking at me, trying their best not to cry, and I soon found out why. In order to save my life, they put me through an operation. Not only have I lost my child, but I won't be able to have one ever again. Henry was also bruised, but my wounds ran way deeper. That was it, and I could never forgive him. If it weren't for him, none of this would have happened, I thought. None of it. I got a divorce later, after Henry tried over and over and over to fix the situation, to apologize, to ask for a second chance. But all I saw were empty words. There was no second chance. I tried to keep myself busy, find a way to invest my money and time, trying to get my mind off the accident. I decided to open up a toy store. I wanted to bring joy to all the children. One day, as I was standing in my store, I glimpsed a small boy standing out front, looking at a toy. The boy was alone, about 8 years old, but that wasn't all. His clothes were patched up and looked more like rags. His face and hands were dirty, and he just stood there, looking at the doll, daydreaming. I found myself walking out to him, but when he saw me coming, he ran away. A few days passed, and that boy's gaze was all I thought of. Then, one day, I found him outside the store again, looking at a different toy. I moved towards him slowly this time, till I was right beside him. Then I said, "Do you like it?" The boy freaked out and tried to run again, but I caught his arm this time and said, "Don't be afraid. I'm Susan." The boy looked at me, terrified, and I smiled. He started to relax. He told me his name was Billy, and that he was 7, and that he lives nearby. When I asked him about his parents, he said he never knew them, that he lived with Uncle Max. I asked him who Uncle Max was, but he cast his eyes down and was nervous all of a sudden. He looked a bit scared. I got curious, so I took him home with me, let him shower, and prepared a hot meal. I told him that I'd take him home after he'd eaten. I asked him about where he lived. He was quiet for a second. Then he said he had to go, that his brothers and sisters were waiting for him. I asked him how many he had. "Around 50, he said. I was shocked. He told me that they all lived in a big room with Uncle Max. "But how is this Uncle Max able to look after you all?" I asked curiously. But he got nervous again, and he insisted that he must leave, so I decided to take him there. Maybe it'll help clear some of the mystery, I thought. I drove, and Billy was guiding the way, until we got there. The place was a bit far from all the other houses. It looked more like a dump, with some sort of shack built on it. A man was standing in front of the door, holding a kid by the arm and beating him senseless. The boy was younger than Billy, and Billy was shaking next to me, mumbling to himself, "He's gonna hit me too. I'm so late." Then he turned to me and said, "Bye, Susan. You have to leave now, quickly." And then he ran towards the shack. I backed up the car and stood nearby to see what happens. The man hit him hard across the face, and I heard him say, "Where's the money you stole today, boy?" Billy turned out his empty pockets, and the man dragged him inside by the collar. I wanted to help, so I decided to call Henry, who was more than happy to answer my call. I told him what had happened, and he came to me. We approached the shack together slowly and looked through the window. A lot of children, ages from 3 to 7. The place was a real dump. The man was sitting at a table. It had food and drink. Billy was dragging a heavy sack on the floor, and another kid was carrying a cup to bring to the man, who snatched it out of the boy's hand. Then he got up and started waking the rest of the kids, telling them to get out there and bring him money, that they would face a real nightmare if they didn't. I wanted to barge in, but Henry stopped me. He called the police instead. The police came quickly, and they caught the man. Apparently, he kidnapped these children from parks and surrounding areas, so they could steal for him, and he would starve them and beat them. The police didn't know what to do with all the children, and I felt like this was my second chance. I told the police that I would build a home big enough, and I would take them all in, to give them the care and love that they deserve. And that is how I became a mother to 50 kids.
I am Matthew, 21 years old, and I must tell you something. I am a madman. I need treatment. But what kind of treatment is there for my kind of madness? You see before you a man with torn clothes who speaks to himself all the time. I used to be a doctor, but I left medicine to pursue aromatology. In case you were wondering, aromacology is the study of fragrances, such as scents of flowers and how they affect people. Let me tell you my story. My parents were very proud of me because I was intelligent, well-known, and well-respected at my university. I earned high marks in all my courses. Dad wanted me to join the College of Medicine because he had always dreamed of my becoming a doctor, and I felt that I couldn't deny him that. My parents did their best to make me happy and to help me achieve Dad's dream. But to be honest with you, medicine, engineering, the arts, none of these interested me at all. They weren't my dream. I loved flowers and their fragrances, like rose and honeysuckle. I would extract fragrances from them and give them as gifts to my friends and family. They all really enjoyed these aromatic gifts. My dilemma was that I had to find a way to tell Dad that I would rather study botany, plants, and aromacology, fragrances, over medicine any day. I knew he would think that I was crazy to give up the lofty study of medicine to work with flowers, but what can I say? I have loved flowers and fragrances ever since I was a youngster. I have always been fascinated by exotic flowers and scents. Learning how to make fragrances from flowers required me to meet with a lot of people who worked in this field. One day, I had to face the moment I had been dreading because my parents had arranged a large social gathering to celebrate my success at the university and my joining the College of Medicine. Dad asked me to tell everyone about my ambitions as a doctor. I suddenly knew that the moment had come when I needed to make my startling announcement to my parents. I told the audience I had decided that being a doctor was not for me and that I was going to change my field of study. Dad looked at me with an astonished look on his face, and then he began laughing. He thought I was joking. Then I turned to him and said, "Dad, I'm not joking. I'm serious. I want to study flowers and fragrances, similar to the types of gifts I've given you before." The audience suddenly got very quiet. They could sense that this was an epiphany for my parents. The embarrassment and shock in the air was palpable. Dad looked at me and said with an affected smile, "Matthew, you were born to be a doctor. Forget all this nonsense about silly flowers." A little testily, I said, "Dad, extracting fragrances from flowers is not silly." Dad said, "Bah, forget about that." The party spirit was somewhat subdued after this testy exchange. Regardless, in deference to Dad, I began studying medicine, but most of my energy and attention was directed towards flowers and their fragrances. Sometimes I would spend time with my medical friends, and sometimes with my aromacology friends that I had met earlier. I spent my first year in medical college earning high marks as usual, but I had no passion for it. It neither excited nor interested me. There came a day when I had had my fill of medical studies and just couldn't take it anymore. So I decided to leave the College of Medicine to pursue my true passion, flowers and fragrances. When I told Dad of my decision, he was very upset, cursing at me and accusing me of being mad, insane, crazy. I repeated that I had zero interest in medicine and stated that the true madness was sticking with a field that I really didn't like at all. I moved away from home and stayed with a friend for a while before finally renting and moving into a small apartment. I faced a lot of obstacles in the beginning, but I didn't give up. I set up an arboretum by planting some flowers and nurturing them. I was working on a rare kind of fragrance extracted from a variety of flowers. I had to travel to obtain these specimens. My product fragrances weren't successful at first, but I persisted. Initially, I offered my fragrance products to various factories, but all refused my offer. So I continued in my studies. I worked in many different places. In the evenings, I would spend all my free time doing my experiments. Over time, I grew more proficient in producing unique fragrances. Then one day, I received a phone call from a famous factory. The factory owner told me that he might be interested in working with me, so I sent him some samples of my work, and they delighted him. And I was delighted that he was delighted. Thus began the lucrative stage of my new endeavor. I started earning a decent income and achieved a modicum of success in the end. After a while, I called Dad and asked him to forgive me, and he did, finally realizing that my passions were not necessarily his passions, and that I must pursue what I enjoyed the most. I have my own factory now. I achieved my dream in the end. My advice to you, the readers, is never to give up when pursuing your dreams. With persistence, you will be successful one day. So what do you think? Was I a madman to give up medicine for aromacology? Was I a madman to give up medicine for aromacology?
Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren. Did you ever wonder what it would be like to have your life completely destroyed by someone close to you? Ever thought about what you would do then? I didn't have time to think, because that's exactly what happened to me. It all started 2 years ago. I lived a quiet life with my mom and dad and my sister. I loved my family. We were always together. We were happy until that fateful day. My dad got fired from his work, a big company. He had worked there for 20 years. The only money we had then was what he had managed to save over the years. Finding a new job wasn't easy. It was a hard time for all of us, especially my dad. He was becoming desperate. At times, he just sat there, quietly, deep in thought, and I rarely saw him smile since. One late night, we were still up waiting for him when he walked through the door. But something was different. He wasn't walking straight. It was the first time in my life seeing him drunk. I decided to take matters in my own hand. I started job hunting. I was lucky enough to find something suitable at a startup company. The pay was good enough, and the more I worked, the more I earned. I was trying my best to get our life back. I was giving it all I've got. My dad started asking me for money. I was more than happy to give him what he needed. I didn't even ask what it was for. Then he started asking for more. He came late almost every night, and he was never awake in the morning. It seemed like we hadn't talked together for ages. Then, money started disappearing from my purse. I got home from work one night. It had been a long day, and I was really tired. I put my bag in my room, and I went to the kitchen to find something to eat. I made myself a sandwich, then took it back to my room. But when I got to the door, I saw a shadow moving inside. I thought everyone was asleep, so I opened the door slightly and looked inside. I couldn't believe what I saw. My dad was standing over my bag, and my wallet was in his hand. He found no money in it, so he threw it on the bed and started going through my purse. At that moment, my mom came down the stairs. She had my dad's shirt in her hands and a small pack of white powder. I looked at her face. Her eyes were filled with tears. I tried to speak, but found nothing to say. My dad came out of my room. He saw us standing there. Suddenly, everything changed. He tore the shirt and the pack from my mom's hands. He was hysterical. He started breaking things around him. My mom and I were too scared to move, but then my sister came running down the stairs. He pulled her towards him and held a knife to her throat. He threatened to kill her if we didn't give him money. Without a moment's thought, I did what he asked. Things only got worse. Nothing was ever enough. He asked for more and more money, and if I refused, he'd get violent, beating up anyone in his path. I couldn't stand by and watch, so I would just give him what he wanted, until I decided enough was enough. He barged down the stairs one evening and asked for all the money I've got. I told him we had expenses to pay, the rent, school fees, but none of it mattered to him. He asked me again for the money and threatened me if I didn't do what he asked. I refused. He hit me so hard that I crashed my head against the wall and fell to the floor, bleeding. Everything went dark. My mom took me to different hospitals, and I had to do a lot of checkups and tests, but all the doctors said the same thing, that this was it. I was sentenced to live my life in darkness, never to see the light again. Bumping my head against the wall was one of the reasons, but apparently my psychological state played a huge role in my recovery. The doctors suggested that I'd be taken to a psychiatrist. My dad felt sorry for what he had done to me. He quit the drugs and alcohol, tried to be proper, but it was because of him that I was in this state. I didn't know if I could ever find it in myself to forgive him. I was torn inside. He was my dad, but I couldn't forget what had happened. I stopped talking shortly after, and he left, disappearing from our lives. No one knew where he was or what he was doing. A year had passed, and he came home. He sounded good, kind of like how he was before. He's trying to make up for what he had done. But to me, nothing he does makes a difference anymore. I'm still in the dark. That's something I'm gonna have to live with my whole life. I can't change that. What do you think I should do? Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren. Did you ever wonder what it would be like to have your life completely destroyed by someone close to you? Ever thought about what you would do then? I didn't have time to think, because that's exactly what happened to me. It all started 2 years ago. I lived a quiet life with my mom and dad and my sister. I loved my family. We were always together. We were happy until that fateful day. My dad got fired from his work, a big company. He had worked there for 20 years. The only money we had then was what he had managed to save over the years. Finding a new job wasn't easy. It was a hard time for all of us, especially my dad. He was becoming desperate. At times, he just sat there, quietly, deep in thought, and I rarely saw him smile since. One late night, we were still up waiting for him when he walked through the door. But something was different. He wasn't walking straight. It was the first time in my life seeing him drunk. I decided to take matters in my own hand. I started job hunting. I was lucky enough to find something suitable at a startup company. The pay was good enough, and the more I worked, the more I earned. I was trying my best to get our life back. I was giving it all I've got. My dad started asking me for money. I was more than happy to give him what he needed. I didn't even ask what it was for. Then he started asking for more. He came late almost every night, and he was never awake in the morning. It seemed like we hadn't talked together for ages. Then, money started disappearing from my purse. I got home from work one night. It had been a long day, and I was really tired. I put my bag in my room, and I went to the kitchen to find something to eat. I made myself a sandwich, then took it back to my room. But when I got to the door, I saw a shadow moving inside. I thought everyone was asleep, so I opened the door slightly and looked inside. I couldn't believe what I saw. My dad was standing over my bag, and my wallet was in his hand. He found no money in it, so he threw it on the bed and started going through my purse. At that moment, my mom came down the stairs. She had my dad's shirt in her hands and a small pack of white powder. I looked at her face. Her eyes were filled with tears. I tried to speak, but found nothing to say. My dad came out of my room. He saw us standing there. Suddenly, everything changed. He tore the shirt and the pack from my mom's hands. He was hysterical. He started breaking things around him. My mom and I were too scared to move. But then my sister came running down the stairs. He pulled her towards him and held a knife to her throat. He threatened to kill her if we didn't give him money. Without a moment's thought, I did what he asked. Things only got worse. Nothing was ever enough. He asked for more and more money, and if I refused, he'd get violent, beating up anyone in his path. I couldn't stand by and watch, so I would just give him what he wanted, until I decided enough was enough. He barged down the stairs one evening and asked for all the money I've got. I told him we had expenses to pay, the rent, school fees, but none of it mattered to him. He asked me again for the money and threatened me if I didn't do what he asked. I refused. He hit me so hard that I crashed my head against the wall and fell to the floor, bleeding. Everything went dark. My mom took me to different hospitals, and I had to do a lot of checkups and tests, but all the doctors said the same thing, that this was it. I was sentenced to live my life in darkness, never to see the light again. Bumping my head against the wall was one of the reasons, but apparently my psychological state played a huge role in my recovery. The doctors suggested that I'd be taken to a psychiatrist. My dad felt sorry for what he had done to me. He quit the drugs and alcohol, tried to be proper, but it was because of him that I was in this state. I didn't know if I could ever find it in myself to forgive him. I was torn inside. He was my dad, but I couldn't forget what had happened. I stopped talking shortly after, and he left, disappearing from our lives. No one knew where he was or what he was doing. A year had passed, and he came home. He sounded good, kind of like how he was before. He's trying to make up for what he had done. But to me, nothing he does makes a difference anymore. I'm still in the dark. That's something I'm gonna have to live with my whole life. I can't change that. What do you think I should do?
I don't believe in ghosts.
Evil spirits, haunted houses, metaphysics, etc. I only believe in science and facts. But sometimes things happen that shred all your beliefs. I want to introduce myself. I'm Lisa. I'm 14 years old. I live with my mom, dad, and grandmother. And they're all very proud of me. I'm the leader of the science club at school, and I've been the perfect student for the past 2 years. My hobbies are reading, watching educational videos, and learning. I like to discuss matters with rational people, not those who believe in myths, aliens, ghosts, and other such nonsense. I personally think these people have mental issues. One morning, my grandmother passed away. I was sad for a long time because I missed her so much. On the day of her funeral, the whole city must have come to say goodbye. While the priests were praying, I noticed something peculiar about one of the graves in the graveyard. After the prayer ended, I approached the grave in question to investigate. There was some weird writing on it. Then, a wispy, transparent, smoky figure appeared out of nowhere. It said to me, "Do not get closer to Donna Median's grave. Beware." I shivered slightly and asked the apparition who Donna was. And it replied. Who was she? She was an evil witch who liked to scare people. She was burned at the stake as a witch, but before her death, she swore a curse that if anyone ever approached her grave, her ghost would haunt that person to the day they die. I did not laugh at the apparition's warning. Instead, I turned and returned home, thinking about what had happened. On a sudden defiant impulse, I decided to visit that grave that night to see for myself if the curse was real. I took my dad's flashlight and wore a raincoat. It was pitch black outside. The place was horribly unsettling at night, but I wasn't worried at all. It's not like it was real, right? I entered the gate to the sound of howling dogs and meowing cats. My blood ran cold, and a sudden chill ran through me. I turned on the flashlight and began searching for the grave. My hands were trembling so badly, I dropped the flashlight several times. Sometimes I would step on something crunchy, and I would shine the light downward, only to see that I had stepped on an insect. Sometimes I'd see a cat here and there. Then suddenly, I heard an eerie sound close by. I froze, not daring to move. Slowly, I pointed my light towards the sound and gasped as my light illuminated a dark, shadowy figure. It was about my height and dressed all in black. I spun around and fled as rapidly as my faithful feet could carry me. I dove into bed, but I didn't sleep at all that night. I even left the lights on. The next day, when I woke up, I asked my dad if graveyards had ghosts, and he wondered why I would ask such a question. I was embarrassed and laughed to hide my fear. I told him that I was just curious. That was all. Dad looked at me suspiciously, but continued. I've heard stories, he said, that some people have seen a ghost of a girl from time to time beside Donna Median's grave. I felt my heart sink, and I asked slowly, "Is she about my height and dressed in black?" He replied, "Yes, that's how I've heard the ghost described." "How in the world did you know that?" I looked down casually and answered, "Oh, I read an article about it on the internet last night." My head hurt just thinking about this ghost thing. I made up my mind to prove or disprove it once and for all. I called my friend Laura and persuaded her to come with me to the grave. The following night, we met at the stroke of midnight at the entrance to the graveyard. Laura was shaking and constantly casting glances right and left. The weather was rainy and gloomy. The ground was muddy, and cats were meowing everywhere. It would have made the perfect setting for a supernatural horror movie. While we were looking for Donna's grave, flying bats would occasionally startle Laura, causing her to scream alarmed. As we approached Donna's grave, we suddenly heard a sound behind us. We both turned around at the same time and screamed. A ghost was glaring at us. It asked angrily, "What are you doing beside my grandmother's grave?" "Wait a minute. Are you girls?" She uncovered her face, revealing that she was just a girl, and a beautiful one at that. She told us that her name was Carmen and asked me to turn off the flashlight because it hurt her eyes. I did. Then I asked, "Who are you?" She replied, "I'm the 5th grandchild of Donna Median, the poor woman in this grave who has been wrongly accused." We both whispered back, "Wrongly accused?" She continued saying, "Yes. She was a victim of the Holocaust during World War II. Afterwards, she became a simple doctor who treated people who were afflicted with epilepsy. As usual, there are always some small-minded, superstitious people looking to make trouble for others. They accused her of being a witch because they considered epilepsy to be a disease caused by a demon's touch. I come here every day to put flowers on her grave. People have mistaken me for a ghost because I only come at night. I don't want people to know I'm related to someone they think to be a witch. I don't want to be shunned, scorned, or gossiped about." I tried to comfort her and calm her a little by saying, "Don't worry, Carmen. Your grandmother's spirit may be able to rest in peace if you tell people the truth now. We live in more modern times, and there's no need to worry. I won't tell anyone about you being the ghost. It'll be our little secret." Carmen laughed. She and I became good friends after that. Ever since that day, whenever I hear someone talking about ghosts, I just look at the photo I took of Carmen and I break out laughing. I confess that I love money and fame. People envy me for it, or they did. I've been a prima donna since the day I was born. All girls dreamt of being me. My father helped my brother and I achieve all our dreams. But there was one fly in the ointment, and this is my story. My name is Amelia. I'm 17 years old. My father's a businessman. My mother came from a rich family, so we were quite wealthy, rolling in dough, one might say. My brother Arthur was handsome, older than me. He went to flight school. We lived a good life without a care in the world. We had everything: cell phones, clothes, cars, servants, opportunities to travel the globe. We wanted for nothing. The most important thing was our happiness. And so my story starts at the villa where I lived with my family. My father employed many servants to attend to our every need. Martha was our head servant. She was in her 40s, funny, smart. Arthur and I loved her. Oddly, we didn't view her as a servant because she took such good care of us. Mother didn't seem to like her for some reason and was always mistreating her. Father, however, adored Martha. Once I left my iPod in the garden and I was going to get it. On my way to the garden, I passed by Father's office, so I decided to go and talk to him. He was at his desk, and Martha was standing next to him, crying. I figured it was because Mother had mistreated her again. Father saw me standing there, and he asked me why I was still awake, and I told him about my iPod. I didn't think much of it at the time. As time passed, Mother and Martha's disputes became more frequent every day. Father wasn't home a lot, but whenever he came home, he would always ask about Martha first. One time, when this happened, I noticed that Mother glared at Father. I couldn't understand why. Father was often away traveling for long periods of time. One of those times, I noticed that Martha was always tired because Mother was making her work very hard. Mother never let her relax. One day, after midnight, I went to Martha's room to check on her, and I was shocked to see that she looked different than I remembered. I asked if she was pregnant, and she said that she was, but that I shouldn't tell anyone, otherwise she'd get fired. I didn't understand why my parents would fire her for being pregnant. A few days later, we received some really horrible news. Father's plane had crashed, and there were no survivors. We were stunned. All of us were crying, but Martha was crying especially hard. Suddenly, Martha fainted, and we took her to the hospital. Our life had changed overnight. After the funeral, Father's lawyer called us about Father's will. He came to our home and met my mother, Arthur, me, and Martha, and 2 other servants. The lawyer began reading the will. He started with Mother's inheritance, then mine, then Arthur's, and then Martha's. He looked at Martha, cleared his throat, and said in a quiet voice, "Martha, the deceased has left you 10 million to raise your child." The lawyer read the last line of Father's will, which said, "Martha's child is mine." We all gasped, but Mother suddenly lost it. Enraged, she attacked Martha as the lawyer pulled Mother away from her. Arthur was holding his head in his hands, and I was shocked. I said to Martha, "How dare you? How dare you do this to us? This is our money. You don't deserve any of it." Then I spoke to the lawyer. "Please tell me this isn't true." He replied helplessly, "Unfortunately it is." Arthur was glaring at Martha, and he said coldly, "Martha, you are going to die." Martha looked very frightened upon hearing this. That night, the other servants helped Martha sneak out of the house. Arthur came to my room that same night and told me that we had to kill Martha. He said he knew where she was, and that her 10 million belonged to us. At first, I was hesitant to get involved. I mean, that was murder, but in the end, I reluctantly agreed to help him. The next day, we made a call and hired a hitman to rid us of that disaster. Later, we received a call from him. He said that Martha was no longer a problem. We smirked in victory. A few days later, the lawyer came by again. Before he could tell us why he came, we beheld a miracle. Our recently said-to-be deceased father was walking behind him with a servant holding a child. Arthur and I stared at him in disbelief and shock. Then we looked at each other. Arthur's face had gone pale white as all the blood drained from his face. Father was livid and said to us in an accusing manner, "The moment you thought I was dead and that I left an inheritance for Martha, you immediately arranged to have her killed. I suspected you'd try something like this. It was pure luck that I got back when I did. I missed my flight that day, otherwise I would have been dead now. So fortunately I came back early enough for Martha to call me and tell me about your death threat. When I arrived at Martha's place, she was already dead, but I called 911, and they were able to save the child. Then I immediately called my lawyer to revise my will, to leave half of my inheritance to this child. I felt like I was in an endless nightmare. The police arrived and told us that the hired killer had been arrested and had confessed, and told the police that Arthur and I were the ones who hired him to kill Martha. As the policeman was handcuffing us to take us away, I thought about the irony, how Martha was dead, how her newborn baby had survived and was now the richest child in the country, how Arthur and I were going to jail, and how one small fly in the ointment had caused our ultimate fall from grace.
I believe in the metaphysical world and that there are many mysteries that we don't understand yet, like souls, ghosts, and black magic. Are there really evil spirits who wish to do us harm? Well, I may have an answer for you. My name is Ralph, and I am 15 years old. My life became a journey to study the metaphysical world. My parents always told me that reading books about the supernatural world would mess with my mind, but I didn't care. My friends share my interest in the occult. I remember the first time we tried to summon a spirit. We drew a pentagram on the floor and placed black candles at the points of the star in preparation for the ceremony. After the ceremony started, we waited for a spirit to appear, but all we summoned was a small rat. Even so, we were afraid of rats, so it was still a scary experience for us, but not in the way we expected. In our second experiment, we tried to summon the soul of a girl named Mary. Although it was a fun ritual, not much happened. The power went out and we reclosed a breaker and the lights came back on. Then, we heard the voice of a small girl crying and the voice of some woman saying, "No one can get into my forbidden area." We all screamed and ran away, but then we learned later that this was just the TV that we had heard. But that doesn't mean that supernatural events never happen. Don't forget that. In our third experiment, we tried to communicate with creatures from the planet Uranus by sneaking into a clinic that belonged to a friend's father and connecting an electrocardiograph machine to a girl's hands and feet. I thought she was going to die, but she recovered. Now, you may say that I'm experiencing hallucinations and that all our failed attempts could be explained away by normal phenomena. But what I'm going to tell you may make you change your mind and your notions about the afterlife. On Independence Day, we were traveling up north to visit our aunt. Along the way, we stopped at a gas station next to a gypsy camp. The gypsies were gyrating in some kind of wild dance to the rhythm of tambourines, as if they were doing some macabre ritual of black magic and voodoo. At least that's what it looked like to me. I thought it was cool and imagined myself living the life of a carefree gypsy. Among them was a woman with tattoos all over her body. As we pulled into the gas station, she was staring at me intently, and I felt strange, as if her gaze had affected me in some way. After stopping at the gas station, Dad and I got out of the car, and I was surprised when the tattooed gypsy woman approached me and presented me with a cute black cat in a small metal cage. I knew that superstitious people feared black cats and believed them to be omens of bad luck, but personally I disagreed with them. Cats are cats, regardless of the color of their fur. I thought she was trying to sell it to me and asked her how much it cost. She told me that it was a present given to me for free. I thanked her and she turned and left. Dad finished filling up the car's gas tank and we drove away. My parents were surprised when they saw that I had magically gained a black cat in a cage, so I explained what had happened with the gypsy woman. Dad didn't like the cat's black color. He said it looked so dour and gloomy. Just as Dad said that, the cat turned its head towards Dad and hissed at him, as if he took offense at the comment about his fur. When we got home, I opened the cage and let the cat out. It walked around the flat and seemed to be looking for something. Mice, probably. I made it a cozy bed from a blanket and gave it some food. We played together for a bit. Though I had thought it cute before, its movements and features started to strike me as predatory or hostile in some way. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I shrugged it off, thinking that we'll get used to each other in a few days. Later, I began noticing that it had a quirky knack for disappearing and reappearing, as if by magic. At times, I would hear the cat meow as if it were glaring at something. But when I would try to see what it was looking at, there was nothing there. One evening, after visiting a friend, I went home and wanted to get some sleep. Normally, the cat would sleep beside me, but on this particular day, I couldn't find it anywhere. Suddenly, the power and lights went out, and all I could see was darkness. I heard something moving along the wall. I scrabbled around and found a flashlight and shined around. There was the cat. Its reflective eyes shined white, and its canine teeth loomed large like tiger fangs. Big and conspicuous, and ready to bite into something juicy. It was glaring at me as if I were that juicy something, but I yelled at it, and it retreated. My parents had come to see what was going on, so I pointed at Sparky. I had named the cat Sparky, and told them that Sparky seemed like he wanted to attack me. But they paid me no heed. Later that night, I was trying to go to sleep when I suddenly noticed that Sparky was lying right next to me. I broke out in a cold sweat. When I told my parents about Sparky's magical appearance at my bedside, they told me that I was just sleep deprived and that I would feel better after getting some sleep. I finally got to sleep and dreamed that I was in a dark house shining a flashlight around and that Sparky was getting ready to attack me again. I woke up with a start and found Sparky sleeping next to me. I told Mom about my nightmare, but she brushed it off as a bad dream or indigestion from dinner. Then one day, my parents had to visit one of our relatives, and so left me home alone with Sparky. I was really nervous. I tried to find Sparky, intending to return it to that darn gypsy woman, but it pulled its disappearing act again and couldn't be found. That night, my parents were outside when the lights went out again. Again, I heard a sound. Shined the light, saw Sparky with the white eyes and large fangs glaring at me as if ready to pounce on me and attack. Deja vu. I must have fainted because later I woke up to find my parents standing beside me, shaking me to wake me up. They looked worried. I told them about Sparky in the dark, ready to attack again. I asked where Sparky was, but they didn't know. We searched for it everywhere, but couldn't find it. After that day, I began feeling better. Had I been dreaming? Had I been hallucinating? Was it just my imagination? Was Mom right about my books on the supernatural messing with my mind? Sitting, I sighed and dropped my hand to my side. It fell upon something warm and fuzzy. Sparky was there.
Hello, I'm Dahlia. Naturally, it's every girl or boy's dream to get employed after they graduate and start their practical life. And that's what happened to me. Right after I graduated, I found the perfect job. I was hired as a graphic designer. As you all know, on the first day of work, we want everything to be perfect. We get ready. We arrive there early just to show them that we're diligent and hardworking. So I got everything ready the day before it, just in case. My clothes were ironed, the colors matched, my shoes polished. It was all good. Though it was only 11 p.m. when I went to sleep. Thought I'd get a fresh start in the morning, but I wasn't sleepy at all. I'm used to staying up all night. So I got up and I started watching The Fault in Our Stars. A romantic movie was bound to make me fall asleep. The movie was over after I cried through it, and I didn't feel the tiniest bit sleepy. Anyway, I ended up sleeping at 6 a.m. after a long night, and I was supposed to wake up at 8 because my work started 10. When I opened my eyes, I checked the time. 9:30? Oh no! I flew off my bed, jumped in the shower, got dressed, and ran out the door. I took my car, but there were traffic jams everywhere. It was a half-hour drive to work, and the traffic wasn't moving. I lost all reason, yelling at people hysterically, telling them to move out of the way. Finally, they started moving. Oh, it's not over yet. What better to make things worse than a flat tire on the highway? And not a single person stopping to help. So, for the first time in my life, I'm changing my car's tire. Needless to say that the clothes I prepared for hours were all black and so messed up. But I hurried off to work anyway. I got there at noon. I wasn't really sure if I should go up. I'm 2 hours late on my first day. I stood there fretting. Is my first day going to be my last? I'm so late and I look like heck. I checked my bag and I found my makeup kit. It was worth a try. I took my bag and I ran to the door, asking where the bathroom was. I tried my best to make it work. I took off my jacket. Well, it was better than before. All I wanted was to go to work looking like a human. I went to the secretary and I told her I was supposed to start today. She went in to tell the manager I had arrived, and that was it. I heard screaming and shouting. Where does she think she is? How dare she show up 2 hours late on her first day of work? She's fired! Where is she? The door opened and he stormed out. So handsome, so elegant. His tie went perfectly with his suit, and he just stood there staring at me. Then quietly he said, "Please, come in." His secretary looked confused. We sat in the office for about 2 hours. Or was it 3? I lost track of time. I started work that day. Turns out he was my neighbor. So we started going to work together, meaning of course I wouldn't have to change the tires again. But my life started changing too, a little at a time, and my work was going great. Ian was a great boss, and I felt like it was the perfect place for me. 4 months later, Ian proposed. I can't tell you how happy I was. We got married and now we have 2 kids, a girl and a boy. We still work together, helping the company grow. My first day at work wasn't the perfect beginning, but it certainly led to the perfect ending. If there's anything I've learned, it's to do your best, even if it seems impossible. Drastic and dire situations create heroes. No one makes history unless their story is inspiring or involves great pain and suffering, overcoming many obstacles and hardships. No one achieves glory without believing in themselves and their abilities, or at least, that's what I think. Sometimes your path to making history doesn't quite go according to plan. My story is a great example. I'm Joanna. I'm 21 years old. I live with my parents and my little sister Veronica. My father was a police officer. He was very brave. He was my idol. He believed in justice and sacrificed anything to see it done. One of my life goals was to be like him. I loved to see him in his uniform. I viewed him as a hero of sorts, and believed the old adage that good always triumphs over evil. Unfortunately, that rosy affirmation doesn't always hold true in real life. My father's work used to keep him terribly busy. Nevertheless, he took a few hours off on Veronica's birthday so he could be there with us. Halfway through the party, Dad's work called and told him that a thug was holding a group of nursery kids hostages, demanding a large sum of money and a means to escape the scene. Dad had to leave to deal with the situation, so he excused himself, telling us that duty calls. We were used to seeing Dad dash off suddenly at various times to deal with crimes in progress, but something felt uneasy about that particular time. Dad arrived at the scene just when his colleagues were preparing to charge into the building at significant risk to the kids. Dad volunteered to enter alone to take out the criminal before anyone got hurt. He sneaked into the building and engaged the hostage taker in a gunfight. He managed to kill the thug, but was seriously wounded. He died days later. The whole police department and the city were saddened by his loss. They held a memorial service for Dad. This senseless crime and the loss of my dad galvanized me to enroll in the police academy. Mom tried her best to dissuade me, but I refused to budge. I passed the entrance exam and worked my way through it. It was a challenging program that required diligence, persistence, and patience. The training was quite difficult at first, with very few breaks, and everyone else was intelligent and competitive. In fact, I began to doubt if I could keep up with them. But then I dreamed of Dad hugging me and telling me that I was his hero, and that he would always be at my side. When I woke up the next morning, I felt somehow different, more confident, more resolved to succeed. I worked even harder, and my instructors noticed and acknowledged my extra effort. I made friends, who soon gained confidence in my abilities. My grades improved considerably. Graduation day came, and I anxiously waited to see what my first assignment would be. I was ready to tackle crime, to fight for justice, for all. Unfortunately, my first assignment was as a traffic cop. I was disheartened to see my peers get more prestigious positions, even though I had higher grades than they did. Dejected, I went home and told my mom. She encouraged me and told me that everyone had a job to do and should do it to the best of their ability. Rewards would come in time. She said she appreciated the work of traffic cops, who kept city traffic flowing smoothly during accidents and other abnormal situations. Her words helped me to accept my situation. Regardless, the work was boring, and I still envied my peers for their more important and more glamorous assignments. Life's just not fair. But remember those dire situations I mentioned earlier? Well, during one of my traffic control days, when a traffic light had failed, I noticed two black cars idling in front of a bank in a no parking zone. Initially, I thought it was the bank manager or some other VIP stepping into the bank for a quick stop. I turned my attention back to my traffic control and waved the cars waiting in the left turn lane to proceed to turn left. Then, I looked back at the bank and noticed that a man had gotten out of one of the black cars and stepped over to speak with the bank guard, standing outside the bank. Suddenly, he struck the guard and knocked him unconscious. Then the cars emptied as a group of masked men exited and rushed into the bank. These actions all occurred in quick succession. An armed robbery was in progress. I called the police station on my radio and reported the incident. The police quickly showed up and took the waiting car drivers into custody. The masked men had no choice but to remain inside the bank, with the customers as hostages. They were trapped. They threatened that if they weren't let go free with the money, they would blow up the bank and kill all the hostages. My father's life and death scene played across my mind like a movie rerun. I watched the policemen discussing what to do. I felt that I knew more about these city blocks than they did, because I spent many hours every day plying these streets, directing traffic. So I volunteered to enter the bank alone. Since this was my beat, I knew that the bank had a secret entrance that the criminals couldn't have known anything about. Thanks to my police training, I was able to easily pick the lock on the secret door and sneak in through the back. I saw two hallways, one to the left and one to the right. I decided to take the one on the left. I expected that the right one would lead me to the lobby, where the criminals were holding the hostages. As I moved stealthily, I heard a noise and discovered that I had reached the lobby instead. There were 4 masked men watching the hostages, who had been tied up. Then, I spied a bomb in the midst of the hostages. These guys were definitely serious. One of the hostages spotted me, and I gestured to him not to speak or look at me. Unfortunately, one of the thugs had already noticed the hostage looking in my direction. He looked over and saw me. I fired and hit him in the shoulder. I knew the shot would cause the other policemen to rush in, so I needed to distract the masked man quickly. One criminal was holding a hostage in front of him, and he told me he would kill her if I didn't put my gun down. I lowered my gun to the floor, stood up, and raised my hands. All the masked men were watching me, with their backs to the main entrance. Just as I was about to get shot, the police squad rushed in and told them to freeze. The thugs surrendered. The hostages thanked me, and the police chief thanked me for risking my life for the hostages. The next day, the governor called me into his office and praised my bravery and dedication. He surprised me by transferring me from the traffic control division to the crime prevention division. I felt my father's spirit watching me at that moment and smiling with pride. My friends began calling me the Girl of Steel, and I was perfectly okay with that.